reminding me. Just did that.
I think you were already on it.
Just barely this time. Just barely. We've got a couple people still out with COVID, and I'm glad they're respectful of us to not get us infected. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about tonight, and it's going to be kind of a different conversation in part. We're going to wrap up on ethics, and we're going to start talking about business in general. And this is my lesson plan. It's handwritten. It's not in the PowerPoint form. We're going to just visit through various pieces of it as best we can. And we'll get as far as we choose to go. There's some very interesting stuff we'll talk about tonight, I think. And some tools that you will want to use back at the ranch, wherever that is. We have some things to catch up on. I have here something from those of you that were in the leadership class. I know only part of you were. This is my tomato.
Oh, wow.
I apologize that I was bringing the plant and it fell off. Everybody, I think, has little stories. Let me catch everybody else up to date on the tomato. On April the 5th, we had a class that started in this room on leadership, and it's a class that you will have an option of taking in a few months. Those of you that have already taken it will have graduated at that point in time. And we passed out packets of tomato seeds with a challenge to grow a tomato. And we had some discussion about that. And the discussion involved the question, can we make a tomato grow? And at first we think, sure, we just got to plant it and feed it and it'll grow. But the reality of it is that we can't make a seed grow. All we can do is create the conditions under which it could grow, but we can't make it grow. And we went about trying to prove that. We all took packets of seeds home and planted tomatoes, and I was getting various apologies and excuses, some pretty incredible things. I got some photographs of a ripped up tomato plant that the dog really had dug in, and somebody's were growing really good on one day in the kitchen, and they put them outside, and the next day the sun hit them and they were brown, just one day. We had a lot of disasters. We knocked them over. We put them in a spot where they got damaged by toys, kids' toys. We had a lot of things that happened to the tomato plants, and I heard a lot of excuses people were making about why their tomato plant wasn't going to grow. Why we did it was that while we can't make a tomato plant grow, we certainly can kill it. And that's probably what I wound up doing now. My tomato plant is nice. It's about this tall, and it had a tomato on it. I've been watching the tomato, and you know, it's a pretty pitiful tomato. You wouldn't want it on pizza, I'm pretty sure. And this sat in my car all day today, so it's a stewed tomato now. And the plant, for some reason, only had one bloom on it ever. And I think my mom, when she plants a tomato plant, they got like 400 blooms on them. You know, I don't know. It seemed like when we had to pick them, there were all kinds of tomatoes there. And our point really was about leadership, that the same is true with people. We can't make them grow. All we can do is create the conditions under which they can grow. And so to do that, for a tomato, we have to get the right pH on the soil. We have to get the right amount of ammonia and potash and nutrients in the soil. We have to get the right amount of sunlight. You know those poinsettias that we buy at Christmas time? They will only bloom if they have exactly 12 hours of sunshine and 12 hours of dark. So the greenhouses, alter the lighting conditions in order to get those things to bloom. It's got to be just so, or they won't. And lots of plants are picky like that. The conditions have got to be just so, enough water, but not too much, right? The kind of soil that people in South Jersey, and they call that the Garden State because New York eats a lot of stuff, and they grow it in New Jersey, right, where they've got a lot of farms, and the soil is sandy, and it's sandier than the soil that we have in Illinois, where my farm is at, and it's a much better soil for tomatoes. The sandiness allows the roots to grow well and to flourish. So if the roots are good, the plant is good. So there's all kinds of things that we have to get in order for the plant to even grow, much less bloom and produce a tomato. But there are 1,000 ways that we can screw it up. Hard to get it right, easy to screw it up. I've worked for that guy. Bosses, it's hard to get it right. It's really easy to screw it up. And so that's kind of what our whole journey is about, right? It's becoming a better, and not screwing it up, a better leader, a better creator of the conditions under which our employees can bloom and produce the tomato and flourish. I mean, it's possible for a tomato plant to win the state fair. I can't believe it, but all 50 states have, you can bring your giant watermelon or your tomatoes or whatever to the state fair and you can win. Well, how does that work? You create the conditions in which you can get a super tomato, whatever those conditions are, I'm not sure. But anyway, I wanted just to report to those of you that started the tomato journey and say, well, I think that at this point, I think we all failed. Has anybody got one that's, yours is on the way?
Mine is this big.
It's that big.
It took forever for them to sprout, and then most of them died. 3 survived, and they're only about as big as that bottle right now.
No blooms?
No blooms yet.
Yeah, I don't know what we
Now
need.
my brother's got ones next, and his are they're just jungles.
Yeah, what's with that?
I don't
You
know.
know,
He's
just
got
because it
green
mattered,
thumb.
that's why.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Well, enough of the tomato. That wasn't for this class. That was just a report, kind of a summary for those of you that went along for that ride. Today we are going to finish up on ethics for now, and I'm trying to decide how we want to do all of these handouts. I want you to eventually have them all. I don't think we'll get through half of them today, so I don't want you to take them until we're going to talk about the various ones. Some of them we are going to highlight, read, and most of them they're going to be referenced, and a couple of them we'll dig in a little bit more. But this handout right here, so I think I'm going to want you to get up and sit down and get up and sit down a couple times to keep you awake anyway. This handout and this pile right here is the syllabus for the class. So it's kind of giving you what we're going to be talking about topic by topic in more detail than what's online. And I want you to take that because there are the 5 homework assignments that will be required for you to turn in as part of the grade for the course. So those are going to be on here, and actually they are going to, one of them is going to become the final exam, except for a mirrored exam for the actual certification that I will walk you through, and anyone else that wants to potentially take certification at some point will have, you won't have to take the test, but we'll go through test questions and examples of that. For everybody else, the final exam project is going to be to write a risk analysis, and we'll be talking to you about what the risk analysis will be and what that assignment will be, but that will be in 2.5 months from now. That will be when that is due. The last day of class will be the final, and that's articulated on here. But there are a few other assignments and they're all involve you doing something as assigned, and then you will write it and post it up on Canvas or hand it to me or email it to me or text it to me. However you get it to me is up to you. I can't walk you through Canvas yet because they haven't unlocked it for this class, but they promised that they promised to have it done today, and something happened. So I'm going to hold them to class on Tuesday. Hopefully we can get everybody on Canvas that hasn't been on, and that will be the easiest portal for you to take a picture of your work and throw it up on Canvas, and then I will get it there and I can grade it there, and that will be what's necessary. Some of them, we will have some presentations during class of what you did, of what you learned or what you discovered. And so I want to make sure that before class is over, we walk through the first assignment, which is going to be due, all of them will be due by the end of the course. But don't wait till the end of the course to do the assignment. This one you should do kind of right away because it's about ethics. It's you are to evaluate or test the business ethics of a pending function. Now we've heard our guy on our video, and we're going to watch the last two of his videos today, and then that will wrap up his conversations. But these will all be about example companies, and you're going to come up with an example that you come across in your work, or you read it in the paper, or you see it on the evening news, but something that smacks of an ethics decision. And then I wanted you to give it the test, or a test. Now, at Carnegie Mellon, they are giving it a 3-question test, right? Utility and generalization, they've got a test that we are learning. But that's not the only one. You can give it just a smell test, and you can talk about why this doesn't match with your ethics, your personal ethics. I'm good with that because your ethics are your ethics. They're not mine. If we worked in the same company, I would try hard to make sure our ethics were in line. But as we come in the door here, we all have a slightly different spin on our personal belief sets. That's our value system, and that's okay. And differences in opinion don't usually wreck us. Just sometimes we fight them over them. I lived in Ireland for a couple of years, and I've never understood what's going on in Northern Ireland. I mean, they've explained it to me, but it's, how can you fight for 1,000 years over Protestants or Christians? Come on. Let's stop that, and what we're seeing with Russia and their hostile invasion, there's ethics questions that come up there, and so we have differences of opinion, and I'm not going there. I won't judge your moral compass. You have a right to your moral compass, whatever it is, and that's not what this class is about. Is to teach you a moral compass. That's what your family's about, and the people you love most. That's what that's about. And if you belong to a religious team, that's their job to help you with your moral compass. This class is not designed to do that until such time as we've worked together, and then we'll have some conversations about that. But I want your homework assignment to simply say, here's a dilemma, here's a situation, here's a decision, and you can write about that in a sentence or more if you want. Just establish what it is, and then give it a test of whether it's ethical or not in your opinion, and say why. I think it's rational or it's irrational. It's defeated if scaled. Whatever your thought process is. We've been watching it on the video, so it can be as complex as you want it to be, and it can be as simple as you want it to be. If it's something you got to turn into your boss because it's something that's going on at your office, be careful about your words. But this is a great excuse to say, hey, I had this assignment, and I'm going to write about why we're shipping bad quality out and saying it's okay. I've seen a company here in town make the statement to all employees, go ahead and ship it. The customer has the right to inspect it and return it. That's like sending everybody burnt pizzas. And we know what's going to happen if that happens, right? You're going to be a Blaze pizza,
Yep.
and you're going to be headed back to Vegas to try to sell some there. You're not going to make it in this market, right? And so the ethics of a question, that's going to be an assignment. I'd like to do that in the next couple of weeks. You could do it now if you wanted, but you could do it in the next couple of weeks. That will be your first assignment. I don't think that's over anybody's head. I think that's well within your wheelhouse. So we are going to finish that up, and then we are going to venture into the first part of this big, thick book, which is listed, the ISBN number, it's listed in your syllabus. This is not required reading. It's a good reference material if you are going to own a company at some point in time. or if you're gonna work in an HR department specifically at some point in time. Otherwise, we'll just draw from it and talk about it. And I'm gonna be talking about the first, 50 pages of it or so today. And we're gonna be looking at business entities, business structure, a little bit about a corporate structure. We're gonna talk about sales and marketing for a minute or two. We're gonna talk about finance for a minute or two. But before we do any of that, let's finish up with ethics. Let's watch the remaining. We interrupted in the middle of a video clip when we had class last, and I am not going to finish that. I'm instead. That did a little more than I expected it to. Wrong. Writer. Wrong. Luke, somebody's got to give us directions on this someday. How to run this stuff here.
Clear off.
We can turn it, I'll leave it right there because you can see the board. So we're going to watch the last two, session 5 and session 6.
To session 5 in this business ethics tutorial, and my congratulations if you made it this far. But I think the best part is yet to come. We're going to look at some business case studies, 6 of them, 3 in this session and 3 more in the last. So in this one, I want to begin with the subprime mortgage crisis, and then we're going to move on to 2 others, one involving a dilemma of one of my MBA students, and finally the issue of marketing Prozac. This is not intended to be the final word, the final analysis. I'm only giving you the first pass of an analysis to show you what ethical reasoning looks like. All of these cases deserve closer study. This is only the beginning. Okay, Countrywide Financial. In 2007, Countrywide Financial was the largest mortgage lender in the U.S. A year later, they were gone. They issued about 9% of their portfolio in subprime mortgage loans. This is compared to about 20% nationwide. A subprime loan, of course, is one in which the borrower is somewhat risky, doesn't meet the usual standards for a mortgage loan, and as a result, the interest rates are higher. Things were going fine until 2008. In late 2008, there was a global credit freeze we all know about. We're all still suffering from the consequences of that debacle. And subprime loans played a role in this. The banks would make the loan and then sell them to someone else who would repackage these loans into a mortgage-backed security. And those securities were sold around the world. They somehow received AAA ratings from the ratings agencies. And as a result, banks, even in Europe and elsewhere, were buying these things. But when the crisis started, they were poisoned. Everyone was trying to get rid of them. No one would give credit. In the meantime, there were the credit default swaps, which supposedly were to give some security to people who bought mortgage-backed instruments. At that time, there were actually $62 trillion worth of credit default swaps outstanding. That's about equal to world GDP. What happened to Countrywide? Well, back in 2007, the CEO complained that there was really too much anxiety over this mortgage thing. It really wasn't that serious a problem, particularly for his company, which was below the average in subprime portfolio. Nonetheless, by July 2008, the company had sold out to Bank of America for 1/6 of its value a year earlier. Okay, how about subprime loans? Is there anything wrong with a subprime loan? Well, they have a legitimate purpose. The purpose is, well, if you have a customer who wants to buy a house, who had some bad luck in the past, this is a way to get back on a good footing. Okay, to be forgiven, to prove you have a reliable credit record, even though the past looks a little iffy. However, in the 2000s, this got out of hand. A lot of borrowers were lured into risky propositions. One of the favorite loans was the so-called 228 loan. That means for 2 years, the interest rates would be low, and you can afford the house payments. But in the 3rd year, the interest rates go up. What are you going to do then? Well, maybe you'll be better off. Maybe your house value will have increased because everything's going up, and you can refinance if necessary. In addition to those, there were a lot of adjustable rate mortgages going around. Everyone was assuming that house values would continue to rise. But there was something else going on. Because these mortgages were being securitized, that is, sold off to banks to be packaged into securities, there was no longer an incentive to perform due diligence on these mortgage loans. And some of the lenders were not, particularly in the subprime segment. In the absence of this incentive, well, some of these loans simply were too risky. Well, all of this phenomenon contributed to a bubble in house prices, and as bubbles always do, it burst in late 2006. The house values went down. Many homeowners were underwater, meaning that the principal value of their mortgage was greater than the value of their house. And banks began to foreclose. And the rest is a sordid history. The issue before us, issue number one at least, when is making a subprime loan an ethical thing to do? In a few minutes, I'll look at the issue of, do you foreclose on those guys? Well, let's look at the utilitarian test first. Now, I'm going to assume that at the time, people could reasonably believe this was a good risk. Everyone seemed genuinely to believe, and perhaps had some evidence, that house prices would not crash. And if that's so, perhaps, on the average, the utility of making a loan like this was positive, the net utility. So I'm going to suppose people are going to come out ahead on this. I'll assume that so that we pass the test. But that brings us to the generalization test, because even if the expected return for both borrower and lender is positive, there's a lot of downside risk just the same. Things can go sour, and of course they did. Now, to make this a little easier, I'm going to suppose that the lender is providing full disclosure about the terms of the loan. Everyone understands the terms of the loan, everyone understands the interest rates are going to go up, and so forth. However, despite that, the lender knows that the borrower is underestimating the risk. You know, they really want that house. This is their chance. The bank is willing to go along with it. They're just simply not aware of all the factors. And in particular, the borrower is not aware that the lender no longer has an incentive to do due diligence on the loan. They're thinking the bank's going to check this thing out carefully, because banks have always done that. But they're not checking it out carefully because they don't have that incentive. The borrower doesn't know that, and the lender knows the borrower doesn't know that. Okay, so that's the situation before us. Okay, now, can we simply say, caveat emptor, right? These are adults. They want to buy a house. They should check out the risk and be responsible for themselves. When can you say caveat emptor? It's a fundamental issue in business. This comes up all the time. Business, as we know it, requires some degree of trust between the buyer and the seller. If you go into Kmart, you go into the grocery, you can't research every item you put in your shopping basket. You have to trust the seller to give you what you expect. Now, of course, regulation can help here. We can have labeling laws and such things. But as we've discussed before, regulation can't succeed if the business world in general is not ethical enough to go along with this. So we simply have to trust people to give us what we expect. Otherwise, commerce as we know it is simply not possible. So how much trust do we need? So I think the generalization principle says here that the seller his actions are ungeneralizable if they presuppose a level of trust that would not exist if all sellers behaved the same way. Got that? Okay? So you're not being ethical if you're presupposing a level of trust in the system that would not exist if everyone were like you. That's the rule. Okay? So Countrywide, for example, was probably presupposing that the borrowers would not question the due diligence of the banks. They were probably presupposing that people trust the banks, you check out this loan carefully before they make it. And that doesn't generalize, right? Because if it becomes standard practice, if banks are never checking out these loans carefully enough because they're going to sell them off, then the borrowers are going to know about that. They're going to be alerted to it. They're going to be onto it. And they're going to be more careful. In fact, that's exactly what happened. It didn't generalize. The system fell apart. What's the conclusion? At a minimum, to pass the generalization test, the lender has to make sure that the borrower is fully apprised of the risk, in addition to the terms of the loan, and in particular, that the borrower knows the system has changed now, that the lender is going to sell off this loan and doesn't necessarily have to check it out carefully because someone else is going to assume the risk. Okay, so we've looked at the issue of making a subprime loan, which was problematic at the time. How about foreclosing on the guys after you've made the loan? Okay, the interest rates go up, the house value goes down, they can't make the payments. Now what do you do? Now I'm going to assume here there was no actual fraud or misrepresentation in making the loan. Okay, so if you make a loan, you make a contract, and there's fraud and misrepresentation, then legally you can void that contract. Okay, but it's not that easy here. You know, everything the lender said was true. The terms of the contract were understood. It's just that the borrower didn't fully understand the risk, and the lender didn't apprise him of that risk, which is another issue. This is what's going on. Now, given that, is it okay to go in and foreclose when the borrower can't make the payments? Well, let's look at the utilitarian test here. Probably renegotiating this loan, perhaps reducing the interest payments or reducing the principal, probably that benefits both borrower and lender, at least in many cases. Because, you know, if you have to foreclose, that's expensive. Maybe you can't dump this house. There's a lot of risk involved in that. Given that, the lender should renegotiate for the sake of the utilitarian principle, unless that would be unethical for some other reason. People always bring up this issue of moral hazard, and perhaps that's why it's not ethical to renegotiate. Because if everyone renegotiates when every borrower gets in trouble, then borrowers will have no incentive to be careful about which loans they take out. That's the classical argument for moral hazard. That sounds like a generalization test, doesn't it? Well, suppose everyone did this, but it's not quite right. It's not quite the right analysis. So let me try to explain what is the right analysis. Now, if both parties benefit, then probably this is generalizable, right? Because basically they both have an incentive to renegotiate the contract. Now, suppose people who have a contract and both would benefit from renegotiating the contract do so on a regular basis. And very often they do so already. So that's probably generalizable if both parties benefit. So I think we can conclude that if the lender would benefit from renegotiation as well as the borrower, then there's a utilitarian obligation to do so, and it's generalizable too. So go out there and renegotiate. Now, if the lender does not benefit from renegotiation, you have to think about why would he renegotiate? Well, I guess the reason for renegotiating is to avoid the disutility of the foreclosure. Moral hazard isn't quite the problem here, because if lenders were always willing to adjust the terms when people get in trouble, the system would adjust to that. If I get into trouble, they're going to ease up on the interest rate. If that's a common practice, then the lenders would tighten up the conditions when they make the loan because they know they may have to ease up later. So the whole system could adjust. So the moral hazard argument is not quite right. What you've got to do is to consider the lender's purpose in renegotiating, and that purpose is to avoid a foreclosure. Okay. Now, if all the lenders were to ease up when people are in trouble and tighten up initially to account for that, that would not necessarily avoid foreclosures, right? Because basically the same number of people would be getting in trouble, because in the end the terms of the loan are the same. So probably if the purpose is to avoid foreclosure, then it's not generalizable. So what's the conclusion? If renegotiation benefits the lender, you got to do it. You have an obligation to do it. If it doesn't benefit the lender, you shouldn't do it. Not because of moral hazard, but because it's not generalizable. All right. Now, public policy issues are something else. Maybe the government should step in and incentivize lenders to renegotiate, as it has done. Okay, that's another issue. Okay, and perhaps even if the government simply is trying to encourage, through jawboning, encourage the lenders to renegotiate, perhaps they should in that case. That gives another reason to do so. But I didn't look at those issues. I'd like to move on now to a case I received from one of my MBA students. So this was a guy who said that he was working for a bank, a financial institution, and this bank gives financial advice to its customers about how to invest. Well, the bank itself has some investment products like mutual funds. And naturally, the bank would be pleased if its customers would buy its own mutual funds, right? There's sort of an incentive there to push its own financial products. This student was caught in that situation. So his job was to write up this report to send to their customers, and the report contains some information on the performance of the bank's mutual funds. And of course the bank wants these funds to look good. Now, this is not a legal filing, it's not an SEC report. It's just a report to their customers. The boss called this guy into the office. No one else was around. And it's usually like this. Okay, so when the student wrote up the case, he was careful to say it was a one-on-one conversation. There's no paper trail, there's no email, one-on-one. And the boss says, you know what, one of our mutual funds is a real dog, it's not performing well. Why don't you just leave that one out? Just don't talk about that one. Talk about the others. And no problem here, everything you put in that report will be true. You just leave out the bad news. Okay? Besides, we have a fiduciary duty to our stockholders, right? It's our duty to come in here and maximize the bank's return. And this will help us. Now, as far as fiduciary duty goes, I talked about that. The prior question is always, if the owners of the company were in the office, if the stockholders were sitting there at that desk, what should they do about this situation? Should they leave the numbers out? So I'm going to look at that issue. Okay, that's the prior issue. We can talk about fiduciary duty later. We've got to get this prior issue down first. So there's two issues actually here. First, is there anything wrong with leaving out this bad number? And number two, if there is something wrong about it, what's the guy supposed to do when his boss is giving him an order to leave it out? Okay, there's two different issues there, and you got to deal with both of them. The second one, of course, is quite hard. Well, the first part is easy. Is it wrong to omit the numbers? Well, it's deceptive. Like I used the example of the doctor who sends me the report, it leaves out the bad news. That's deceptive because I would expect the doctor to tell me all the news. And I guess the whole point of this, we're leaving out the numbers because we want to deceive our customers about how the funds are doing. Okay. And in fact, you can try to generalize this. Suppose that financial institutions always omitted bad news from their reports. Then what would their customers do? They'd throw the reports in the trash, right? Because they know it's all fluff. Okay, so it's not generalizable. Now, given that it's unethical to leave out this number, what am I supposed to do about it? The boss has told me to leave it out. How high a price am I supposed to pay to be ethical? Am I supposed to sacrifice my job because of one little number? Okay, suppose the boss is saying, if you don't leave this number out, I'm going to beat up your family. That has happened many times in history. And that seems a little bit ridiculous. So there seems to be some limit to what I have to do to be honest here. What is that limit? Okay, what kind of price? Well, we're going to try to address that. It's not easy. I'll do my best. From the utilitarian point of view, the first thing I do, try to compromise. Boss, why don't we just show the average performance? Or why don't we put a footnote that says, well, this fund was in special circumstances, that's why it's so low. That makes everyone better off. Compromise. But perhaps the boss, digs in, he won't compromise. What are the consequences if I refuse to go along with the boss? Who knows? The boss may respect me for this. Or the boss may give me a negative performance review next year. And when the next reduction in force, my job goes first. Who knows? On the other hand, suppose I go along with the boss. Well, this may get around. People may find out I did something dishonest. It may destroy my reputation. It's not only bad for me, but it's bad for the world, right? Because if I can't keep my job, I can't go out there and make a contribution. So I think we have to say utilitarian test, it's just impossible to say, therefore you pass it. Now there's another argument people use, a really important one. I could say, if I don't do it, someone else will. If I don't do what the boss says, he'll just transfer me somewhere else and get the next lackey to come in and do it for me. The result will be the same. Is that a good argument? Suppose you're a prison guard at Abu Ghraib in Iraq, and your commanding officer says, I want you to hook up those electric wires and torture those prisoners. If I don't do it, he'll get someone else to do it. Is that a good argument? Okay, we got to deal with that. The serious one. Actually, the resolution is fairly simple. It's a good utilitarian argument. Okay, you can pass the utilitarian test that way. If the results are the same or worse, if someone else does it, then I'm maximizing utility. You pass that test. Okay, so at best, the someone else would do it argument allows me to pass the utilitarian test. but you've got to satisfy the other tests too. For example, torturing prisoners is a violation of autonomy. Okay, it's unethical for that reason. Okay. So maybe I passed utilitarian test. We'll grant that. But we got to go on to the other tests. Now, what I'm doing here is to obey the boss. Is that ethical? Is it generalized? Well, I suppose that everyone who could keep their job and stay out of trouble by obeying the boss did so. Most people always caved into the boss like this. Would they still be able to accomplish their purpose? Would they still be able to stay out of trouble and keep their job if they caved into the boss? Maybe so. Think of the guys who worked for the Stasi in East Germany. They did what the boss said, right? They always caved into the boss, said, yes, sir. They kept their jobs, at least until the wall fell, at least for a while. So maybe it is generalizable. I can't really say it's not. The catch here is we're not just obeying the boss. We're obeying the boss by deceiving our clients. Okay, now suppose that people were always willing to deceive clients whenever the boss said. They'd always cave in. There would be a very strong temptation for the boss to ask people to do that, right? This is why the boss is doing this in private. He wants plausible deniability. He wants someone else to do the dirty work. This is the way it usually happens with new employees, right? New employees not quite sure what the norms are, so the boss says, well, you take care of this, but no one else knows what's going on. So the boss can keep his hands clean. Well, the bosses can always keep their hands clean and get someone else to do these things. That's a strong temptation, and maybe it would become very prevalent, so the customers would no longer believe the company because they know what's going on in these companies. It always happens. It's always that way. In fact, it's sort of interesting that bosses don't ask us to do that more often than they do, isn't it? Okay. It's sort of interesting. It could be a lot worse than it is. Why isn't it? Well, I think it's because the employees would resist. Okay? They wouldn't put up with this. At least because the good ones would resist. Now, maybe the company doesn't care if the mediocre employees resist, but they don't want to lose their good people. This is one reason to be good at what you do. You don't have to compromise because they want to keep you. Okay. So I think this is not generalizable. That's my call, because it would be such a strong temptation. People would no longer be credible because they're going along with their bosses tell them, to deceive customers and so forth. Now, suppose the threat is much stronger than simply a bad performance evaluation. Suppose that they're going to beat up your family, or whatever, if you don't go along with what the company says. Then is it generalizable to go along with the boss with a very severe outcome? Well, probably it is, because it's already generalized. Even now, practically everyone is willing to leave out a bad number if the consequence is your family's going to suffer. It's already generalized. And despite that fact, bosses don't ask us to do that. They don't put us in that position, probably because they get in trouble themselves. Okay, we get back to them. So it's already generalized, and therefore it's generalizable. Okay, so the conclusion here is that, well, there is a limit as to how far you have to go, and the generalization test basically tells us what that limit is, at least, more or less. There is a virtue issue here, other than the fact that deception is dishonorable. Okay, there's a virtue of being honest. If your family's health is at stake, or perhaps you have a huge expense burden, perhaps you have a disabled child, that's enormous expense, or your parents, are being cared for, and you just can't afford to lose your job right now. You have to make a compromise. Okay, there you have a conflict of virtues. Okay, ordinarily, if there's nothing else at stake, you would say, I have to be honorable about this. I just can't work for this company if this keeps up. But if there's another virtue at stake, like loyalty to your family, well then, yeah, the virtue test sort of drops out of the picture because you have a conflict of virtues. Also, there's a professional issue. As a professional, I'm a financial advisor. I exist, I'm here to give financial advice to my clients, and now I'm misleading my clients. So that's contrary to who I am in my career. So if I have to keep this up for this company, for this boss, I just have to get out of there, because it's not consistent with who I am. Okay, that's how the virtue test applies here. So here's my scorecard for failing 2 of the tests and passing 1. Okay. My last case in this session is a marketing case. It's about Prozac, the antidepressant. Okay, it's a drug that's sold by Eli Lilly. What is Prozac? It's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Okay, so serotonin is a neurotransmitter that I understand makes you feel good. It prevents you from going into depression. And if you don't have enough of this stuff in your brain, well, you start to feel depressed. Prozac prevents the neurons from reabsorbing the serotonin at the same rate. Now, depression is no joke, right? It's a serious, debilitating illness, and Prozac was introduced as a breakthrough in this field, primarily because it had less side effects than its predecessors. When it came out, there was an enormous marketing buzz about Prozac. Even a book came out about, was it Listening to Prozac or something like that? You know, it seemed like everyone wanted Prozac. Well, there's a couple of issues here. One is the marketing strategy of the company. Pull marketing is marketing in which you try to induce the customer to go to the physician and ask for a prescription. Now, the company was also pushing the product on the physicians, right? A very intense advertising campaign for physicians. But at the same time, it was sending ads out there in the general public to induce people to go to the physician and pressure the doctor to give them a prescription for the stuff that makes you feel good. Is there anything wrong with doing this, with pull marketing? It is controversial. Although it's a big business. There's about $2.5 billion a year spent by the pharmaceutical companies on pull marketing. Okay. And secondly, there's some psychological persuasion in these ads. You know, you can be the life of the party. You can feel good about yourself. You can be an extrovert. If you're on Prozac, you're no longer going to be that shy, withdrawn, uncomfortable person. You're going to be out there successful. Is that okay to work on people psychologically? I'm going to try to look at that one too. All right. So, what's the problem with Prozac? Well, you know, it's not all roses. It takes a long time for this stuff to start working. It takes several weeks. Okay, it may not work. It can have side effects, although perhaps not as bad as its predecessors. Actually, apparently, it's no more effective than the other drugs. Okay. It creates dependency. You know, you have to go off it very slowly. And it's not intended to make you an extrovert, okay, or life of the party. It's intended to treat clinical depression. All right. Now, let's look at the pull of marketing. The utilitarian test here is probably the key one. Are we doing any damage out there by encouraging patients to go to their doctor? Now, perhaps the doctor should not give in to this kind of pressure. Perhaps they should stand their ground and say, you don't need that stuff. Perhaps so, but that's another issue. That's not the issue I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at what the company's doing in the way of its advertising. Too much aggressive pull marketing can lead to abuse of a drug. In the case of Prozac, well, you know, a lot of people with depression don't realize or didn't realize it can be treated. They may not even realize that they have this disease. It's not a well understood disease in the public. So one might make a case that actually pull marketing benefits people with depression to a great degree, to a degree that outweighs any abuse that may result from the drug. Okay. At least, given the evidence we have, let's grant that. At least we can't be irrational. We're not irrational in believing that we actually increase utility with an aggressive marketing campaign, because we bring help to all these people who don't know it's available. So we'll grant that we passed this test. It's probably the key test for this case. That brings us to the other issue, and that's the psychological persuasion. Okay. Is it okay to manipulate people psychologically? Now, the advertising people who talk to me about this say, of course, what do you think advertising is for? You know, you're working on people psychologically. But actually, it's not so simple, particularly in the Western ethical tradition. We have this idea of autonomy. Remember that? We talked about that. Okay. So supposing, for example, they put something in the water to make us buy Prozac. You know, it works on us. It makes us crave this stuff. Is that ethical? Well, we say, well, no, we shouldn't do that. Okay. Well, of course, partly because it's deceptive, right? They're not telling us it's in the water. Okay. We're being deceived about what we're drinking. But that's not the whole problem. Part of the problem is that it's circumventing our rational faculties. And that's a denial of an autonomous decision-making process. Now, you may say, you ethics guys are sort of spoiling all the fun in life. Think about seduction. You want to seduce your lover. Doesn't that work on someone's emotions? Aren't you circumventing the rational process there? You guys just won't let us have any fun. Actually, no, right? Because in seduction, at least when it's going right, both parties know what's going on. So you're being seduced, you intentionally give into it, right? That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it interesting. There's this sort of, you're on the borderline here. You know, if you're doing seduction and the other party doesn't know what's going on, well, that's no fun at all. At least it shouldn't be. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have any fun. I'm just saying that, you know, you can appeal to emotions, fine, but not in a way that circumvents or nullifies the rational faculty, you know, decision-making faculty. So psychological persuasion can be fine if you're simply appealing to emotions. For example, if you're trying to sell this convertible sports car, you know, you want to give people the idea, some idea of what it's like. You know, you're out there on the road, you know, the wind is through your hair, you get the feeling of freedom. That's an emotional reaction, and you have to know about that before you could decide rationally whether you want a sports car. Okay, so the emotions can be relevant to your decision. Or suppose you're a UNICEF person who's putting up an ad here to encourage people to give to some relief agency to relieve hunger, and you put these horrible photos, you know, of children who are suffering from hunger. You know, you have an emotional reaction. Well, you know, you can't decide whether you should give until you understand at an emotional level what poverty is like. It's horrible. You've got to understand that. And then you can make a rational choice. Okay, so appealing to emotions can be perfectly fine. But if you're appealing to emotions in such a way that prevents you from making that rational choice, it gets in your way, then we got a problem. So Prozac ad, fine. If you want to show people, you know, who are at the party and they're gushy and extroverted, that's fine, because you have to know what it's like to be that way, as long as you're also giving the downside and the side effects and so forth and so on. But if you're appealing to someone's sense of insecurity or whatever, some psychological problem, so that they crave it without really making a rational choice as to whether it's the right treatment for them, then that's a problem. It's an advertising problem. So that's how I deal with the Prozac case. Now there is an issue here of temptation. You know, even if you're not manipulating people, you're perhaps tempting people to go get this drug or talk to the doctor about it. Is temptation okay? For example, if you sit down, you know, at a restaurant, at the table, they're going to have these photos of luscious chocolate cake you have to look at while you're eating. They're tempting you to order that stuff. Is that okay? Anything wrong with that? Well, it's not denial of autonomy. You can still decide whether you want to eat that chocolate cake. It just is harder to decide now. It's harder to do it, but you can still decide. So basically the test with temptation is a utilitarian test. Yielding to a temptation now and then is fine. You love it. You think it's enjoyable, as long as it doesn't get out of hand. So temptation is, it has a positive effect, it's fine. It's too bad they can't tempt us to eat broccoli, isn't it? So temptation is not necessarily wrong, it just depends on the outcome. Okay. We've already granted that the Prozac ads passed the utility test. Okay, so that's my analysis of Prozac. Next time, I have 3 more case studies for you.
We'll finish with those, and then we'll be on to our next topic.
Hi, this is the 6th and last installment of a business ethics tutorial, and I'm going to wrap things up with 3 final business case studies to practice our skills in applying ethical principles. I'm going to begin with looking at McDonald's and their influence on our diet. Then I'm going to look at a well-known case study called the Bullard Houses, and I'm going to finish up with an environmental case involving the Conoco Oil Company. So first, McDonald's. Well, perhaps you saw the film called Super Size Me. It came out in 2004. It looked at the effect of McDonald's on our health and the obesity problem in the U.S. and so forth. The name came from the fact at that time, you know, the McDonald's workers were instructed to ask the customer, can I supersize you, meaning give you a large size of fries or a drink rather than the regular size. At about the time the film came out, McDonald's stopped supersizing. They claimed it had nothing to do with this film, but it was about the same time. Okay, so in the film, the director of the film, Morgan Spurlock, went 1 month eating nothing but McDonald's. Morning, noon, and night, nothing but McDonald's. To see what it would do to him. Okay, well, what did it do to him? Well, he went to the doctor before, he went to the doctor after. He gained 24 pounds during the month. He had a number of other problems. His blood tests were coming out bad, his liver and so forth. So it didn't look like it was a very healthy diet. And in fact, he had to go on a detox diet afterwards, you know, to lose the weight and get back to normal. It took a while. So the film suggests that this McDonald's diet is influencing the way we eat, and it's influencing our health and contributing to the obesity epidemic in the U.S. So we're going to try to look at the issue, is McDonald's doing something unethical here? Take a look at this. There's a lot of good lessons in this case, and it does get some people upset. Okay, so I realize that. So bear with me. I'm not propounding a view here. I'm only showing you how the arguments play out. You can think about it. Okay, so there's really two issues involved. One, is the McDonald's menu ethical? And two, how about their marketing practices, particularly toward children? So I'm going to look at that as well. Okay. I'm going to assume that there's full disclosure, right? The customer knows what's in the Big Mac. You know, the ingredients, all the fat and the sugar and the calories, they're there, you know, easily available. So we have no problem with disclosure. Now, the usual arguments you hear, well, McDonald's is bad because they're harming their customer. Right? They're feeding them food that's unhealthy. They're getting diabetes and so forth. And, you know, they're enticing kids to come in with these kids' meals, you know, Happy Meals, and the kids get hooked on this stuff. They develop a taste for it. All right? On the other hand, people defend McDonald's by saying, well, you know, these are consenting adults. This is what the customer wants. McDonald's is not responsible for what their customers want. They're just providing, you know, the demand. And besides, they offer salads. If you want a salad, although I understand that the dressing on the salad actually has more calories than a Big Mac. Too bad. And finally, as for the kids, well, parents are responsible for their kids. That's their responsibility. Okay, so you can listen to these arguments all day long and get nowhere. Let's see if we can get somewhere with this. Okay. So issue number one is the menu. Anything wrong with this? The utilitarian test is the key one here. Okay. What's the effect of offering this menu to the world? It's a question of fact and not ethics. Okay, we cannot resolve the health effects of McDonald's marketing and menu by sitting around talking about it. You've got to go out there and research it. Okay, that's why we distinguish issues of fact and issues of ethics. Then the ethical decision depends on the outcome of the research. Okay. On the other hand, we can't just sit back and say, well, I think it's okay. Right? Because there's probably a prima facie case here that the McDonald's menu is having a negative effect on health. Right? It's making people fat. At least it looks that way. So it's probably not rational to believe that McDonald's menu is having no negative effect, given casual observation. At least we got to do is to research this issue. The least we got to do to be ethical here. Now, I'm going to make an assumption, so we have something to talk about. Okay, I'm not claiming this. I'm only assuming, for the sake of argument, let's assume that the McDonald's menu could be adjusted to increase utility at least a little. If nothing else, they can take all that high fructose corn syrup out of the buns, out of the hamburger buns. Okay, they're going to taste the same, you won't get as fat. I'm going to assume that there's something they could do, maybe a little, but at least something. And if that's true, they're failing the utilitarian test, because they should do it. Now, I'm not assuming that McDonald's causes people to be overweight. I'm not assuming that McDonald's is doing more harm than good, and they're doing a lot of good. I'm only assuming that McDonald's could at least tweak its menu to make it better for people. If that's true, they're failing the test. Now, the response to that is the one I mentioned before. Okay, may be true, but these are consenting adults. We'll talk about kids later. These are people coming in asking for this stuff. I mean, who is McDonald's to say what people should eat? It's just not their responsibility, to make decisions for other people. So, yeah, maybe utilitarian test, is failed, but so what? Well, I have to tell you, utilitarian test takes into account all of the consequences, including those that are mediated by the choices of others. Now, if you don't think so, suppose you're a pharmaceutical company, and you have two possible projects in front of you. One project is a miracle cure for cancer. It's going to relieve millions of people from a horrible death. You can develop that drug. Or you have another product that's, is really super duper toenail polish. Make your toenails look great. Okay. Equally profitable. Okay, you measure the utility. The cancer drug utility goes through the roof. It's wonderful. The toenail polish, okay, not so good. So what are you going to do to pass utilitarian tests? You're going to say, well, in either case, people freely choose to use the product, right? Okay, so, people freely choose to take the cancer drug. The physicians freely choose to prescribe it. So there you have free choice, just like in the hamburgers and french fries. So for that reason, you're simply not going to count all that good it does. You're not going to count all that relief of suffering and death. because other people choose it? Of course you're going to count it. So you've got to count all the consequences, even if free choices are involved. So that's the way the test works. I asked for this idea about being responsible for others' decisions. This is not to imply that McDonald's is supposed to be responsible. Let's suppose some customer comes in and gorges himself with chicken McNuggets and ruins his health. McDonald's is off the hook so long as its total utility is maximized. It's not responsible for that customer's decision. We're only saying McDonald's is responsible for the total utilitarian consequences of its decision, which may be mediated or go through the choices of others. Now, am I being puritanical? That's a sort of an Anglo-Saxon proclivity we have here in the U.S. Is life about some indulgence? Well, of course it is, and that's okay. You know, if you have a mom and pop restaurant, and they have these luscious fudge brownies, okay, and you give in to temptation to eat one, well, that probably increases utility, right? You don't eat enough of those, just once a week or once a month, and you love it, no problem. The difficulty with McDonald's is that they're ubiquitous, right? They're everywhere. They're so convenient. And when they offer a product like that, everyone's eating it. The utilitarian outcome is different for them. This is the price of success. You have greater responsibility. You have greater consequences. You've got to consider those consequences. So yeah, you don't have to be puritanical. Just consider the overall consequences. People can indulge to a certain degree, just not all the time. Okay? Now, the children thing. Well, the marketing is more aggressive than you might think. Okay, it's true they have the Happy Meals, they have the play areas to entice the kids, to give them a free toy. Okay. But also, I mean, I have read that the marketing people actually ride around in SUVs with parents to watch the kids nag their parents stop at McDonald's. And they observe which nagging techniques work. Then they demonstrate those techniques in their ads so the kids won't know how to nag their parents. Now maybe this isn't really true, I don't really know. But let's suppose it is true and think about whether it's ethical. Utilitarian test, we still have a problem. If this is deleterious to the kid's health, even though it's mediated by the free choices of the kids and their parents, it fails the utilitarian test. It's that simple. But we have also another test to think about, and that's the autonomy issue. Are we violating the autonomy of these kids by inducing them to want McDonald's food? They're kids, they can't resist this type of temptation the way adults can. Are we exploiting these kids by circumventing their autonomy? Yeah, we are, but you know, we always do that with kids. We violate a kid's autonomy when we raise them in the home. You have to. Of course, one of the objects of raising your kids is that they will be autonomous adults later on. You prepare them for autonomy. But while they're a kid, you have to say, you're going to do this. You know, you're going to think this way. This is part of raising kids. So parents already manipulate kids to some extent. We have to do that. So that's the McDonald's case. I'd like to move on to another case study. This is a very well-known case study. It's used often in MBA courses. It's called the Bullard Houses, and it's about negotiation. There is a family called the Bullard family that owns some decaying townhouses, and they'd like to have them redeveloped. They're going to sell them to a developer, but they don't want the development to be garish and commercialized. They just want a nice, pleasant townhouse development. There's a hotel chain, the Conrad Milton Hotel chain. It wants to buy these things and actually put a big high-rise hotel and use the houses as a kind of lobby for the hotel. Just the sort of thing the family doesn't want to happen. Well, the hotel chain is negotiating through an agent who is not telling who their client is. So when the Bullards go to negotiate with this agent, it's called absentia, they don't know that the hotel chain is actually behind the bids. The agents, absentia, have instructions not to reveal to the Bullards what their true purpose is in buying this property, because they know the Bullards wouldn't go for it. They wouldn't sell. They knew. So the negotiators have these instructions. Okay? What do they do about this? Well, there's a couple of scenarios. In one scenario, the Bullards may specifically ask, do you guys have any commercial plans for this other than just developing the townhouses? What do you say? Or they may not ask. They may not bring it up. They're just sort of assuming that the development will be in line with what the Bullards want. Then do you say anything about it? Do you tip them off? Because we have these two related issues. Now, some of my students say, well, look, the Bullards, if they're concerned about this, could just put a clause in the contract to require the property be developed in the right way. That's all they have to do. So there's no issue here. Let's go home. Problem is, they didn't do that. They're not asking for a clause in the contract. You've got to deal with that fact. So deal with it. Let's deal with that fact. Maybe they should put a clause in the contract, but they're not doing that. How do we deal with it? We've got to talk about negotiation. In good faith negotiation, what you've got to do to make the negotiation work, you've got to tell the other party what you're delivering, what you're selling. And you've got to allow the party access to the product so that they can find out whether it's what they want. And finally, you have to avoid deceiving the other party. Negotiation just simply can't work if you don't have those three conditions satisfied. On the other hand, you're not obligated to reveal how much you want the product or what it's worth to you. So if I'm selling you a car, okay, I have to let you look the car over. I can't deceive you about what the car is all about. Okay, I have to tell you about the car. Okay, but I don't have to tell you that I can't even drive. So the car's worth nothing to me. I don't have to tell you that. In fact, I shouldn't tell you that. But it would cause negotiation to break down. If you think about it, what happens in negotiation? Okay, so if I'm selling you a car, okay, I have the lowest price that I will accept for the car. If you're buying a car, you have a highest price that you'll pay. Okay, suppose I tell you my lowest price out front. Then you'll only offer the lowest price. And suppose you tell me your highest price. I'll insist on your highest price. And we can never come together. Okay? The only way we can come together is if we don't know each other's highest and lowest price. Then we somehow try to meet in the middle. So when we make a bid or an offer, that's sort of giving some information about where our limits are, but not complete information. This is what negotiation always does all over the world. Okay, it's done in different ways, but that's the basic issue. You've got to conceal how much you want the product yourself, or you'll never come to agreement. So it's a necessity. So with that as background, let's suppose the Bullards are asking about, you're going to build a high-rise hotel here? What do you say? Well, one thing you might say is, no. Or you might say, we don't know. That's just a lie. It's an out-and-out lie. You do know. You do know there are plans. Okay? Lying is not generalizable. It's unethical. So you can't do that. Can you say, we're not at liberty to tell you the plans? Sure, you can say that. It's true, and it's not misleading. It's just, and then they can take it from there. Okay, is that enough? Just to say, we're not at liberty to talk about the plans? If you know what they want, are you obligated to say something more? So if they don't ask you any more about it, do you tip them off? So let's look at that. Well, first of all, we're not obligated to reveal to the Bullards how much we want this property. In fact, we're required not to reveal that. So at least prima facie, there's no obligation to tell them how we're going to use the property. In fact, perhaps we shouldn't tell them, because then they know what it's worth to us. But perhaps there's some deception involved here. By not fessing up to what's going on, perhaps we're deceiving them. Perhaps they assume that if we were going to develop the property contrary to their wishes, we would say something about it. If that's true, if they would expect us to say something about it, then we're deceiving them, and that's not ethical. Perhaps they don't expect us. Perhaps they expect us to be a hard-nosed negotiator. In that case, there's no deception. So it's a hard one to call, and it depends on the precise situation. It depends on the question of fact, the psychological issues involved. What do they expect from us? Are they actually being deceived? So that's how you have to call that one. You sort of have to be on the scene to call it. There's another issue here, however. When you carry out a complex negotiation, you have to form relationships with people. You can't get us through a complex deal. And that you sort of get to know the other guys. Look them in the eye. Go out to dinner with them for a few days. So you develop a bond of some kind to get through this negotiation. When that happens, then virtue ethics comes into the picture. Okay? If you can't look these guys in the eye, when you know something that they don't know, that betrays the relationship. Okay, so if negotiation requires forming a relationship, and you have to betray that relationship, to honor the wishes of your employer, you got a virtue ethics problem. You got to get out there. All right, that's how I call it. That's what I see the arguments coming to. Okay, we got one more for you. Last one. This is Conoco. Now ConocoPhillips. So back in the 1980s, Conoco began drilling in the Ecuadorian rainforest. They were about a third of a consortium going out there to prospect for oil. The National Oil Company was going to receive 80% of profits after covering investment costs. Okay? So it's government land. They're focusing on something called Block 16, which is part of a national park, Yosemite National Park in Ecuador. And here's a photo of a very beautiful waterfalls in this tropical park, okay? Largely undeveloped area. Well, there have been some environmental problems with past oil drilling. Millions of gallons of oil have been spilled, waste dumped into the rivers, toxic drilling mud buried all over the place. Conoco wants to get out of this. They want to address some of these problems. There's also a problem involving the indigenous people who live there. They're building access roads, which encourages people to move in and occupy this land. They're clearing large areas of the forest. They're threatening the biodiversity. And as for the people, they're the Huarani people, I think I'm saying that right, who have had very limited contact with the outside world, but now the presence of these oil prospectors is threatening to essentially destroy their traditional lifestyle. The Sierra Club is calling this ethnocide. Okay. Well, Conoco has a plan. At a cost of about a 5 or 10% increase in investment, they're going to mitigate these environmental damages. Their argument to the stockholders is that, well, we may get regulations slapped on us later, and it's cheaper to take care of it now. So they're going to collect the hazardous wastes, take care of the drilling mud, limit access by not building bridges into the area, and they presented this environmental plan to the local interest groups in 1990. Okay. Well, subsequently they sold out, they practically gave up. They sold out to a Maxis Corporation, who was later bought out by an Argentine firm, a long tortured story. They got back in Ecuador in 2006. They bought Burlington Resources, got drilling rights, but then due to local opposition, indigenous rights protests, they put the drilling on hold, and well, that's where it stands today. Okay, so what's the issue here? What are a company's obligations to protect the environment beyond those required by law? So I'm going to suppose some of this pollution, at least in Ecuador, is legal. And what are their obligations to the people? Is this ethnocide? Now, people often answer by saying, this is the government's problem. The government should step in and regulate these guys. Well, probably they should. But people will say, well, the government should do it, therefore, the company has no responsibility. The problem is with the therefore. If the government's not doing it, it's not so clear the company has no responsibility. We have to look at that issue, so we're going to look at it. Utilitarian test is simple in principle. About prospecting for oil, the company is benefiting the world. They're obtaining cheap energy. On the other hand, they're creating damage. You have to do a ledger, add it up, and see what the consequences are. This is a question of fact, not ethics. We can't do this here. And we also have, well, if I don't do it, someone else will. We have that argument. If Conoco doesn't play the game the other guys are playing, someone else will come in and drive them out of business because they'll operate at lower costs, and the results will be the same. So you have to conclude that the pollution, to the extent necessary to stay in business, passes the utilitarian test. And apparently not too much pollution is necessary to stay in business because they're willing to take on a 5 to 10% investment cost increase to reduce their pollution. Okay. But I'm going to suppose that a significant amount of pollution is necessary to stay in business there. All right. And then deal with the other issues. The basic problem here is that regulation in this part of the world is weak. This kind of behavior would be illegal in much of Europe or North America. What does this prove? Some people say, well, it proves they're sort of hypocritical. They're willing to violate their own country's regulations when they go somewhere else, but I don't know what to conclude from that. However, you may be able to construct a generalizability argument. You might argue that these companies depend on a prosperous and well-developed economy up there in North America and Europe for their profitability. And these parts of the world are successful economically in part because they're not destroying their environment. They have environmental regulations. And if they didn't, perhaps it would destroy the first world economy. And this company wouldn't be able to exist as we know it. So perhaps it doesn't generalize. And if companies always violated these ethical rules about environmentalism, they would not be able to achieve their purposes. Okay, so you can construct that kind of argument here. Now, as for ethnocide, killing a culture is not the same as killing a person, right? The people may be fine. You just destroyed their way of life. Now they're living a different way of life. Well, the traditional point of view in the West has been that these guys ought to be assimilated into the larger culture. The first school for assimilation was actually built in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. They took native people from North America and brought their kids in, dressed them up in Western clothes, cut their hair, taught them English, and insisted that they become just like Europeans. So that was the view at that time. Today we have a different view, that indigenous culture should be respected for their own sake. In fact, there's a very strong indigenous rights movement all over the world, particularly in Ecuador. They're among the first. The traditional Western view is that agency only applies to individuals. We don't have a doctrine about the agency of groups. You can't murder a culture. That's because we are traditionally focused on individualistic ethics. However, in some cultures, in fact most cultures, there's a collectivist mentality. We see ourselves as autonomous individuals, but in much of the world, people that see themselves primarily as a member of the family or a member of the village, rather than as an individual. The unit of existence is a collective, not an individual. So there, autonomy applies to the collective and not to the individual. So maybe it is possible to have ethnocide. At least if you have a different concept of who you are as a human being. This, by the way, is an approach one can take to cross-cultural ethics. Obviously a topic I can't get into right now. So from this broader point of view, perhaps we have a problem with ethnocide. Something that Western ethics is going to have to look at in the future, I think. There is a virtue ethics issue here. Even if we can argue that the company can go ahead, carry out its operations in Ecuador, the people who are doing it may find this contrary to who they are. They say, I just don't want to be involved in this. Someone else would do it if I weren't here. But personally, this is not the contribution I want to make in my career. And they may have to move out for that reason. So here's a case where the individual manager may have a different set of obligations than the owners of the company. Okay, that is my last case. I have a list of references here if you want to pursue these ideas further. And you can have a look at my website. There's a large number of materials there available. And I hope you will not stop with this short tutorial, but take this as a starting point to think about how ethical issues can be analyzed. After all, they come up every day. You can get lots of practice.
All right. We'll talk about very little, except that you have a homework assignment to address an ethics issue and talk to me about it. Submit that up on Canvas or hand it to me. There are lots of possible thought processes. We looked at Bullard Homes and their land scenario with Conrad Milton, he called that. That wasn't quite the correct name. I think you all recognize who that was. But anyway, we have, that's how Walt Disney bought the land in Florida that became Disney World, was cloak and dagger, right? Not let anybody know that that he was assimilating a large mass of land so that he could get the land for a reasonable price without the price elevating, because if everybody found out Disney World was going to go there, they'd want more money for their land, right? So lie to the people about the land. Is that ethical? We have a closer to home example. The LDS Church very rarely expresses to the neighborhood when they're purchasing land for a temple. We recently have had that issue with Staley Farms here in St. George, quietly procuring land. Where do you draw the ethics line? And I'm not making a charge. I'm saying it's a question, right? It's a question that's out there. We looked at Eli Lilly with Prozac in his example. It's in some ways almost amusing, but it's an ethical question with a different pharmaceutical company, Pfizer. Pfizer manufactures 3 drugs that are drugs for high blood pressure medication. And they conveniently understood when BioNTech came out with the COVID vaccine from Pfizer, that many of us in this room know somebody that had it. That raises your blood pressure. That's very convenient for a company that also has medicine for that. And so there's a little bit of an argument there that says, is there an ethics problem there? Promoting the COVID vaccine and then driving up your sales to treat high blood pressure. But there's an even more amusing part of that, to me personally, I think. We have an enormous segment of the population in the United States is on blood pressure medication to treat high blood pressure. And so they treat high blood pressure by lowering your blood pressure, and then you need Viagra. And I think what an awesome combination of drugs that Pfizer also owns Viagra. So it's kind of, now that's just a win-win right there, isn't it? We're gonna sell drugs one way or the other. And so there's ethical questions there. And I'm not saying that I'm taking a position on that. I'm throwing them out. You know, and it's possible that we stumble into those kinds of questions. But even if we stumble into them, you know, these are broad scale kind of things. I don't think we're going to worry about us being accused of supersizing our dinner offerings and making America fat. McDonald's was big enough because he said ubiquitous. So the questions that we come up with may be much smaller scale, but they're very real about the culture of our company. We talk about what are our values, what are our ethics as a group. I mentioned that none of us share the same ethic position exactly as we come into this room, but as we unite in a business, we need to have an understanding of what our line is. How ethical do we want to be, and how do we deal with that when we stumble into a situation where we find our ethics are questioned? So that's really dangling it out there. I want to talk about more. Did we miss break? We missed break. Yeah, come on, Eric. Give us you got to give Larry a little nudge and say, Larry, it's break time. Let's take a break right now. We're going to come back and we're going to start looking at business structures, franchises, LLCs, sub-S corporations, all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Come back in 10 minutes. See you.
No, Eric, if I'm looking at you like, say something. Say something.
Just slide something at me.
You all have it right.
Yeah.
If you didn't get signed in, please do.
I have a question. Isn't it illegal in most other countries to advertise prescription drugs? I heard somewhere that in places like Germany, the idea of advertising prescription drugs is just completely out there.
In most places it is not illegal. I mean, you don't do it that way. What happened here was the pharmaceutical companies were marketing directly to doctors, and Congress said that's bias in the way. So a doctor, I'm gonna recommend your prescription because your guy came in and took me to lunch, and Congress said that's too much bias on the physician groups. We'll let the public decide what they want. So it became illegal for drug companies to wine and dine doctors to the extent, because while in Germany they can't market, in European countries they can't market. I was at a medical show in Milan and Genoa. It was big, and it was in two cities, and one of the drug companies rented the cruise ship Key Largo and took us out in the Mediterranean, you know, on a cruise, and wine and dine and done all that. While they can't market to the public, they can market to the docs, and so that causes bias. It causes the docs to go, okay, I'm getting spiffed by this company, so everybody I see I'm going to prescribe that medicine to, whether they need it or not, really, or it won't hurt him, so we give it to him, and so it's like neither one of those is the right answer.
No, I think both should definitely be
Yeah.
gone, but
Yeah, it's kind of
money
jacked
talks,
up.
right?
Do you by any chance remember that lady's name with the payroll
I'm sorry?
service? Did you ever remember that lady's name that had the payroll
I
service?
do. Susan Romberg, and I was looking for a phone number, and I thought I had it, but maybe I'll give it to you.
Oh, that sounds like it. I mean, hopefully she's still trying to transition.
Yeah,
That would be awesome.
yeah.
Thank you.
Finally had a couple of issues in the shop right back.
Like that?
The hydraulic pump that controls all the transfers from the saw, it's been leaking hydraulic fluid forever. Everybody has small hydraulic fluid over there,
Wait, where's it at?
over by the saw.
Oh.
Yeah, it finally started leaking so bad, it started squirting out everywhere, and then the hydraulic pump started to whack into it. It was right at the end of the day too. So,
Okay.
we had 30 minutes left of the day. Britton calls me and he's like, yo, I need John out. So I got done cleaning up and I walked over and I was like, hey, what's going on? You good to run it? And John was like, you do not turn on this like fuck, dude. Actually, shut down the price switch. We're done for the day.
So what's gonna happen? I don't know what to fix it.
He patched the leak, the main leak, which is not the only leak, and we filled it back up and it should hold for the minute. Should. The code projector all finicky again. Laser eyes all scuffed 6 ways to Sunday. It keeps spraying itself with molten metal. Pulled out the old laser and the plastic sheet in front of it. Just melted. So it was causing the distortion to the laser and the rigging beams, but you probably have to pause it for 2.
What's that?
If it don't read properly, and if you're operating it, it looks like it reads correctly. It cuts the hole.
It cuts a hole, but you don't know what's happening.
Yeah. This is a half a job. It's like from 10 paces away, it's a dirty glass window. I'm like, I told Randy, I was like, unless you expect me to look at every single hole, every single piece
Well,
of
that's
plastic.
information.
I was like,
That's painful.
this way you buy a machine,
Yeah,
right?
otherwise
Almost
you
$1
could
million.
just like have people do it like they used to do.
There's just a couple like those two things that just me in the ass all day. One of our programs just made totally stuffed too, so now we have a bunch of batches all mixed together. Got 3 separate batches totally redundant.
I'm just gonna put the check.
Yeah, sure. It doesn't have a phone number in there. but
That's
you
okay, I'll
can
find it.
payrolls on there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And then, just a report with Steve Day.
all the cutlass, screws, all the nesting for all the heavy plate that gets cut. Make sure all the programs are in the right place for our machines.
Mm.
Riley used to do it with over, but he doesn't do that anymore. So, we just got a couple of programs in that have round holes. That we made for, we're looking at, this one is 7 feet, not 32, but see what's going on here. That's really fun.
That's part of the getting those automated machines,
Yeah.
but you can still have human error.
And then we keep those through the page.
Yeah.
It's
Or
like the
change
slash-
the window at the top.
I like the slash job that we're doing with all the, that's 3 buildings, they're all the exact same. Every piece that's been running through the system, so. Cause they keep deleting the pieces out of the footwork and the drill, and so you're just sitting there, it's the same thing, just leave it. But no, now I have to, go hunt it down and refix it because they're all. A couple ones are bad. Like, no one double checks any of it. You have to go through and double check, make sure everything looks right, fix everything that's not
And
right.
they're just supposed to be there when the machine.
Well, it just takes a lot of time to check every single part.
Okay, we're gonna pick back up. We are looking at business management and strategy as the first section of our topic on our syllabus here. If everyone did not pick up a syllabus, I'm gonna pass these around. Take one, and then I'm also gonna follow it up with a single sheet handout that has to do with various corporate structure options. And we're gonna just visit about that a little bit, talk about a business and ways that a business can be set up. When we look at types of entities, when you're starting a business, you have a lot of choices. When you join a business, usually it's formed and you don't have that many choices. In fact, you have no choices. You just become an employee of the company. And how they've got the company set up is pretty much how the company is set up. What a company does is roughly the same no matter how a corporation is set up. But we're going to separate those. What is the function of a business and what is the structure of a business? We'll talk about that first. Structure, we're going to make an assumption that a business is in business in order to make a profit. That is an assumption that is usually true, but not always true. There are companies that need to generate losses to offset activities that an owner has somewhere else. Those are pretty odd companies. I've worked with a couple that were quite open about that's what their purpose was, but it's rare. Most of the time, when we're dealing with a business entity, it is to make a profit. Now, there are organizations that very commonly blur the profit and non-profit portions of the entities. Intermountain Healthcare would be a good example. Intermountain Healthcare has the marketing perception in most of the public that they're a nonprofit hospital. They're not. They have a nonprofit entity, more than one. They have a foundation and they have various groups that are organized as 501(c) nonprofits. The rules for a nonprofit are different than the rules are for a for-profit business. We're not going to dig into nonprofit here unless somebody wants us to go into that area and try to clarify some things. The rules are different. The rules for a private corporation and for a public entity in some cases are somewhat different also as far as financial statements are concerned. This college does not operate for profit. It's not a nonprofit college. It's a public school. And as a public school, we account different. We are not under what's called GAAP accounting practices or generally accepted accounting practices, where in GAAP accounting you look at profit and loss. This college does not look at profit and loss. They manage rather pots of money. It's budgets. It's what's called budget. And that's called public accounting. The city of St. George operates that way. The state of Utah operates that way. They don't really operate at a profit. Now, when the legislature gets together, they talk about what we would translate as profit. They say, are we raking in enough money in gas tax, or liquor tax, or liquor stores doing good, and they ask those questions, which are profit-related questions. But as a public entity, they're not. So we are going to talk here totally about private companies, ones that we would start, ones that we would work in, ones that we would hope to pay our retirement or provide for our families and that kind of stuff. As such, we said in an earlier class that some of you were in that we have one job. Does anybody remember that was in that class what the one job is that we have as an employee of a company?
As an employee,
Or as an owner, either way.
Make it succeed.
You're along the right track.
Follow your vision.
Let's just state it again. I want to kind of burn this in your head because this is what our job is, to protect and grow the assets of the company. And some of you remember me saying that. Our job is to protect and grow the assets of the company. That's the job of everybody that gets a paycheck. That's why they give you a paycheck. Some piece of that is our responsibility. We're supposed to help the company get better. We're supposed to add knowledge to the company. We're supposed to add labor to the company. We're supposed to add results to the company. We're in some way, we have our part that we play, that we are going to help the company grow its assets. We want the company to make money because of us being there. That's kind of why they pay us. It's not kind of why they pay us, it's the only reason they pay us. Is to help them grow their business. And when you're the owner of the business, you will only write checks to people because they are helping you grow your business. And protecting it is another thing. If you've got a company truck, you're not supposed to tear it up. You're supposed to treat it like it was yours. Take care of it. Now, oddly enough, people don't take care of company trucks. But they should, because our job is to protect and grow the assets of the company. Now, with that as a statement, what's the biggest asset of most companies? Most of the time it's people. Now, a lot of companies have a lot of other assets. A lot of times a company, if they own their real estate, that's one of their biggest assets. McDonald's Corporation is really a real estate company. They own lots of great property in America. Every McDonald's location that they own, the franchisee doesn't own it. They get a franchise for 20 years. McDonald's owns property. And they can throw you out if they don't like you. It's their place. And technically, McDonald's really operates selling hamburgers is just to support its real estate operation, which is kind of bizarre when you think about it. But their assets are real estate, but their real estate assets don't get paid for unless their people help support them. And a lot of their people are high school kids. We know probably people in this room that, our first jobs, we talked about our first jobs, they were in fast food, and so we were helping some owners grow their company. So that's what we're doing in this whole thing of human resources and talent development is really about that one right there. The greatest asset of most companies is not their real estate, it's not their patent portfolio, it's not their inventory. Most of the companies, they will say their biggest asset is their people. Now, people don't show up on a balance sheet. People don't show up on a financial statement. So people are managed altogether different financially, and so it's easy for owners to kind of lose track that that's the most valuable asset. And we've worked for people that forgot that completely, that have treated us less than an asset of the company, right? And that's not okay. And our job is to try to break that and try to operate in our businesses where we recognize that the greatest asset we have is you and everybody, the frontline people as well as the management team. These are the people that make our business. And When you think about organizations like a hotel, who's the most important employees at the hotel? Yeah, I think you could make a strong argument that it's the housekeeping and the front desk personnel, the lowest paid people in the organization. And they're probably the most important in the company as far as really, they're the people we talk to, right? That's who we interface with. We don't know Conrad Hilton or Paris Hilton or any of those. We don't know them. But we know the people that make their company, and we need to have involved with them in our company that they're protecting it. So how we set up a company, it's always going to involve people at some point in time. We may be, my company, Jadestone Consulting or Jadestone Associates, both of those companies are mine. You'll see that name on some handouts from time to time. When you see Jadestones, that's me. Right now I have no employees but me. So it's a company of just me. An owner is the company, the whole company. You have a company that's been you, and then other times it's a bunch of people, and sometimes it's just you, depending on what work and contracts you're competing on and what you've got going by choice. I don't want to have people working for Jadestone that don't have work to do. If I'm focused in a different area, bring a team on when we've got work to do, right? And that's kind of, a lot of companies do that. And that's not a foul. Even big companies in this room's confidential, right? If we start talking about a company and local people and I accidentally talk about somebody that y'all know, it's not, let's keep it in the room if that's the case. It's not, this is a strategic management course, and every now and then we see brilliant strategy, and in the structural steel business, it's a dog eat dog business. You can make a mistake and go out of business really quickly. You're buying big beams of steel, and if you can't stretch them and make them longer. If you cut them too short, you throw them away, and that's a really, really tricky business. And the margins are small to start with, and it's depending on you executing everything properly in order to make a profit. And the people that you have to hire are technical experts. You can't just have anybody that can read a blueprint and can do a takeoff and get it right for your materials list and your cut list and all of the setup work that has to be done to get that right. So it's a business that if you can have a strategic advantage, if you could have a labor force that was zero when you didn't have work, and then when you got work, you could have everybody there tomorrow morning, that would be a great competitive advantage. We had a company like that here in our area that built most of the Home Depots west of the Mississippi River, structural steel. They didn't build the entire facility, the concrete work and stuff, but they built the structural steel. And when you look into Home Depot, that's what they are, right? It's a little 10 metal pinned to the structural steel structure. Well, would you believe that a lot of that came from here? And we got two companies represented right here, St. George Steel and S&S Steel. It wasn't either one of those. It was somebody that found a way to lower their overhead and compete in that industry, in that market, in a way that nobody could before. It was a company in Hilldale, and it was a company that had expertise that they could draw with a phone call. And all of a sudden, tomorrow morning, there'd be 40 welders at Moroni's shop. Some of you know him. Let's leave that in this room. Brilliant strategy, I thought. Home Depot always awarded their contracts. They put it out to bid. Two of their bidders and one local company were allowed to bid on all, wherever it was, and they knew all of them. So they were spec'd for the steel, regardless of who Home Depot gave the work to. That's almost brilliant, isn't it? That's a strategy where if you don't have to pay people except for when you need them, you guys have to pay people when you need them or not. And so you got to find work for them when you don't have a heavy job. So what does that do to your costs? Your overheads are way up, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about how business dynamics work. And so if you could get around that in some legal way, you'd have competitive advantage. That's a strategy. He also had another strategy that was kind of interesting. He had two businesses. One was structural steel. The other was he did wood stoves under contract for the Bureau, Indian Affairs, and he put wood stoves under federal contracts all over the reservations, all over the United States. And so he had contracts going for wood stoves when he didn't have work for structural steel Home Depots. And so he had a little bit of diversity of a specialized workforce. So most people could go home if he weren't doing a Home Depot. Some would make stoves because they had a contract that just kind of kicked along for that. And that was one of the unfortunate businesses that imploded when Hilldale imploded. And so I'm not getting in on weighing in on that politically. A lot of talented people. There was a skewing of business there, and I'm not going there. I'm not getting into that at all. But from a business perspective, that was a company that some of you know who I'm talking about. And so when we look at business structure, some businesses like mine have no employees, some businesses have a lot of employees, some businesses have a workforce that fluctuates from none to many. Some do that by hiring on and laying off. We have a company in town called Zarnowski, and Zarnowski makes exhibits for automotive trade shows mostly, but they make high-end exhibits for high-end, one of the exhibits I saw them make not very long ago was cutting apart a C8 Corvette in half and putting it upside down in a booth, so you could walk in and you could see half a Corvette hanging upside down, and that was cool. And they built one of those. They built one for the I don't know. It doesn't matter what all they do. Their business is centered around when the auto shows are. The Detroit Auto Show in December, the LA Auto Show in January, and so these big international auto shows, they do the exhibits for that. So their work kind of is just ahead of that, and there's a deadline. You don't get done when the show opens, you're out of business. And so, but in the off season, they basically have, let's use the number. If they have 100 employees, they have a core of 30 that stay there, and they lay off 60 when they're not, and then they'll hire them back, and that's not ideal if you're one of the 60, obviously, but it's the way their business has worked for many, many years. It's seasonal, so they'll add employees at a certain time and then bleed them off when their work slows down. We have a lot of companies that do that. There's pros and cons of that, right? You lose talent, and we're talking about talent development, and you're trying to do something cool like exotic and get it perfect for a Ferrari trade show booth. You don't want to lose the guy that knew how to paint, So you've got challenges for managing a workforce if it's changing in size. Some companies handle that with temporary agencies, right? Temporary employees. So you bring on some temps. Well, that's cool. How well trained are they? Yesterday they didn't know you existed. So they're good for certain kind of labor, but very problematic if you've got talent that's needed. And so that's not a good option for that kind of scenario. But these are things that we think about as we put the structure of our company together. So as you look at the one-page handout that came around with the syllabus, you'll see a list of choices. And there are more choices than this, but let's kind of scan down a little bit. Let's talk just about the ways that you can form a business. A sole proprietorship is the first one. A general partnership is the second. A limited partnership is the third. Limited liability corporation or company is the fourth. Those are all different. They don't matter to me if I'm getting a paycheck from them. Their paycheck will cash in the bank no matter which of those entities issue it. But if you are an owner, some of the pros and cons that you want to think through are in the columns to the right. A sole proprietorship is nice because it just goes on your tax return. Your money comes in your household, and you pay taxes on the profits that you make, hopefully, as an individual, kind of like you would. If you just had a side job on Saturday, made some extra money, and it was enough extra money that you decided to claim it and pay taxes on it, that's kind of what a sole proprietorship is. When the company gets sued, that means you get sued. And so there's no protection, if you would, of the assets that you develop. They're your assets. They're your personal assets. When you borrow money, you have to make a personal guarantee. It means you put your house on the line. And lots of us work for companies that are sole proprietorships. We don't know or care that that's what they are, but what that means is when the owner built onto the building and added a new warehouse, they signed all of their assets as collateral for the success of that venture. And so they're betting the farm. The owners of that company are betting their farm when they do that. And so that's very impressive, actually, when people do that. And there are other ways around that. You can form a C corporation, and that is a taxable entity as an individual from an IRS point of view. It's not Steve Carwell, not me. It's this entity right over here. And this entity is all of itself. I'm an employee of that entity, and I may be a shareholder in that entity, but it's not me. That entity is a separate entity. If you're going to sue, you're going to sue the entity, and you're not going to sue me. I have some now you may have a lawyer that's mean enough that they will sue me too. Lots of times owners are named in lawsuits, but the lawsuit is primarily against the corporation, and the corporation is a separate entity. So we have that option. We have some protection on something in between, the limited liability corporations that we talked about there. The LLCs, we see those in lots of organizations now, and we see LPs, which is a professional organization. So certain professions are allowed to form LPs, doctors, attorneys, accountants. Certain professions can form a limited liability professional corporation, but most of us can't do that one. Most of us would do an LLC, a limited liability corporation, and that is supposed to have some of the benefits of both. It's fleeter and easier. It can be me owning it all together, and as a member of the LLC. But then the LLC is supposed to give me some protection against having my assets taken away by somebody that sues the company. And so the idea is to provide a hedge, a veil of corporate ownership that protects me as an individual from what the company might do. So when we talk about ethics, if the company gets charged with doing something unethical, they're going to go after everybody. And so I want that protection. I don't want to go down for something that my boss promised. You know, I want that. I'd like to have that shelter. Now, we have one that I skipped over, and that's a partnership. Talk to me about partnerships. What do you know about partnerships? You're in with somebody else, by definition, but what are you in with? Money? Labor?
And splitting profits and the liabilities, right?
Okay, in a partnership, you don't just share the profit. In a partnership, you share losses too, if they happen, and the liability. Somebody sues you in a partnership, you're in partners. Now, let me just caution everybody at this point in time. Many companies start as partnerships, and it's tempting because I'm young and I'm not. Suppose I was. I'm young, got a lot of energy. I got no money, and I find somebody that's got money and they're tired, and so that's a perfect partnership. I'll do the work. They front the money, and it's awesome. We got a business. Be careful. Most partnerships end badly. And I have seen a few partnerships in this town that have been kind of models for me. That I've watched the number of partnerships that they have been in, and I've been impressed. Some of you may remember. I don't think I'm mentioning your names. That's probably not very classy to do. There are some companies that we know and love and do business with here in our community that are also partnerships. Now they're a little bit more exotic than straight partnerships because they're families. And when we have families going on, families always become interesting. How do you set the business up for next generation and the next generation? And this is always a thing that you need some professional advice on. But there are some that are quite intertwined, and some you know them. Schultz's Products, for example, is a family, and many of you know the family members of Schultz, and it's essentially a partnership at this point. of multiple family members. Social Interstate Rock is another one like that we know in our community, and you personally know these people, your neighbors, and you work with both of those companies all the time. And those two companies are interesting the way, I think there's 16 partners in Interstate Rock that are family members and have been given different pieces of the company, and most of the time that results in an explosion. Most of the time or an implosion. Most of the time that gets because they're not pulling their weight equally, and it's impossible to do that. And your division you got given that because your dad's favorite, and you get all the profits, and I get stuck with all the losses. It gets really messy. And I'm not proposing that we can eliminate the mess. I could say you're probably better off if you can eliminate the partnership. It's very difficult to come out of a partnership, friends. It can happen. It certainly can happen. But if you're going into a partnership, my suggestion would be look at it good. And probably one of the best things that I've seen in partnership, you have an operating agreement between you and your partner. That's a legal document that you put in place. You have a lawyer help you make it up. You can use LegalZoom and other documents, but you'll get what you pay for. You may get what you pay for. You may not have as good of a document as you need. But one of the clauses that I like to see if you're thinking about going into a partnership with somebody, you have to think about how we're going to get out of this at some point in time. If we get tired of each other, how are we going to dissolve this partnership and still have a business that can go on, that can go forward? And so you have to think about some stuff. Let's say, that Luke and I partner up, and let's make it in the room. Let's say Larry and I partner up, and everything's good in our partnership, but something happens, and I wind up with an ex-wife. And all of a sudden, the ex-wife has half my assets. That means she owns half of my side of your company. Now, is that something you want? I'm telling you, you probably don't. You probably don't. But we didn't think about that. We didn't think that would ever happen. That we would wind up partners with somebody that we didn't start out with partners with. That happens all day, every day, in our world, where we didn't see it coming, and then or something happens, and I want to move. I want to move to the beach. I'm tired of this. I want to move to the beach. How am I going to move to the beach? We're partners. So I move to the beach. We start something in La Jolla, and so I go to the beach down there. Maybe we could work that out, but it gets ugly. So one thing that I like as a clause in a partnership is called a shootout clause. And a shootout, I like the name of it too. It's a cool name. A shootout clause says that if I propose, so the deal is that Larry and I are going to have to dissolve the partnership. If you're going to sell to me or I'm going to sell to you, that's going to dissolve. You're going to become the sole owner or I'm going to become the sole owner. One of us is going to buy the other one out. Well, he wants to sell high, I want to buy low. Right? So we're going to have a problem with that. So if I make an offer, a shootout clause says if I make you an offer to buy out the business, a shootout says that you can exercise that offer flipping it around. So if I say, I'll give you $1.2 million for our $10 million business, and I know I'm hosing it. But if I put that offer on the table, we got a shootout clause, what that means is you can exercise that clause in reverse. You can buy me out for $1.2 million. So that forces me to put a realistic offer on the table that says that if you switch it, because you have the right to switch it, you have the right to I'm offering to buy, but you have the right to step in and buy instead of at the terms that I put on the table. That forces people to kind of be a little honest. It's kind of like the right, at the county fair at the stock car races. It's if it's a $500 limit on the value of the car, the winner of the race, anybody else that has a car in the race has the option of buying that winning car for $500. If you've spent more than $500 on that car, you're going to get taken if somebody calls your bluff and buys your car out from under you. That's a shootout clause in racing world. It's the same concept here. And there are many instruments like that, but if you're looking at a partnership, which is very tempting when you're starting a business, look at some terms and find out ways that you can prevent heartache later on. Because if you got a business, you got enough headaches with the business. You don't need to have headaches with your partner. And while we all think partnerships are surely they're gonna go well, the divorce rate's over 50%. And if we can't be good partners with people we love, going into business with somebody is dicey. And when money comes to play, people's value systems change, and their ethics change, and they try to take advantage of their very partners. In some cases, it's ugly side of human nature. So of all these business structures that you see here, anyone that involves a partnership of some type probably has advantages it is bringing to the table you wouldn't consider. But understand with those damages, there's also hazards. And so those hazards are negotiable and perhaps tiptoeable through. But anyway, there's various ways companies can be set up. That's the purpose of that handout. And if you want to do that, by the way, across the parking lot here is a door that says,
Small business development.
thank you, Small Business, SBDC, Small Business Development Center. They're working on a name called Dixie Business Alliance, and at some point in time they may call that. But right now, the Small Business Development Center is something that is funded by Congress all over the United States. There are little offices like that in many communities, and the purpose of that office is to help you start out your business. So their services are all free, which means I would go there first and with this sheet of paper and say, hey, I need some advice on how I'm going to set up the company, because you're not, and by the way, once you set up a company, you're not in business. You know when you're in business? You're in business when you got a purchase order. Until you have a purchase order, you're not in business. You maybe you're going in business, and maybe you're going to make something, but until you have a purchase order, you have somebody that's going to buy something from you, you don't have a business. You may have an entity, and you may have a food truck, or you may have a shop, or you may have a facility, but you don't have a business until you have people buying from you. And at that point in time, now you got a business because you got cash that's flowing. Maybe trickling, but it's flowing. And that's what's required to have a business. Until then, it's wishful thinking. So you want to get that part done as fast as you can, right? You want to get it done so that you start, and some things, if you want to get it done, you want to start a bed and breakfast. This thing's complicated. You've got all kinds of moving parts in something as simple, I say simple because it's not simple, but something as simple as a bed and breakfast. You think that that's a straightforward business opening. It's not. There's a huge amount of moving parts in that because we've got the potential of real estate, we've got the potential of regulations, we've got the potential of food service, we've got the potential of the house, the lodging association, but that's not what it's called, innkeepers laws. And we've got all kinds of people that don't want you in their neighborhood. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's got to happen in order, and then you got to put a bunch of capital in it to make it cute, and because we don't want to stay in, a dump, we want to stay in this place that's got some magic to it, some charisma to it, and I think that's something, and by the way, on that topic, if you're thinking about any business like that one, but there's a hotel in LA that I would suggest you look up on Priceline or Travelocity or whatever your choice of hotels is. It's in the Disneyland area, and it's called the Magic Castle, and it is a 1950s hotel that looks like a dump. And if you look at it online, you're going, I'm not going to stay there. But the ratings are 97% 5 stars, 95% 5 stars, and you're going, wow, this is an ugly property. What is going on? Why do people want to go there? And right now their room rates, I just checked, their room rates are about $350 a night, which is more than the Four Seasons in LA is. Four Seasons is a nice place. Four Seasons is usually more than that, but anyway, right now Four Seasons is lower in LA. $600 a night in LA, in Vegas, so don't go to the Four Seasons in Vegas unless you want to spend a lot of money. But anyway, the Magic Castle is this old 50s hotel that's the property they had, so they thought that what they needed to do is come up with a business strategy that was a little bit different. They've got a pool that's smaller than most St. George houses pools are, but it's got a red phone, and the red phone by the pool is hanging by where the life-saving equipment's at, and it's called the popsicle phone. And you can pick that phone up, and they got 4 flavors of popsicle: grape and cherry, and I don't remember the other 2. They got 4. You can have as many popsicles as you want, anytime you want. You pick up the popsicle phone, and popsicles come to you. A guy in a tuxedo brings the popsicles on a silver tray, and every kid alive loves that. When you are there, you're probably going to Disneyland, and the housekeeping says, "Do you have any laundry that we could do for you today for free?" And everybody that's traveling with kids, kids are sticky. Everybody that's traveling with kids has got laundry to do. And so housekeeping does the laundry, folds it on a brown bag with a sprig of rosemary on it, puts it on your bed at night, and says, "Thanks for staying here, and it's free." And you go, that's cool. People don't remember that the place is a dump. I mean, it's clean. It's not a dump, but it's a 1950s motel. You know, it's not what we stay in, and yet they value customer service. So part of their business model is, let's go over the top with something that is an experience that people will remember, and they'll pay us $350 a night for that experience. So was the laundry really free? Were the popsicles really free? They would not have gotten people to stay there without that customer service level, had they not been doing something over the top to wow. So as you're putting your business plan together with the guys over there, you're not just looking at business structure. We're looking at a strategy. What are we thinking about doing that the other guys aren't? What's going to be the magic thing about our place, about our business, about our service? Something that the other people aren't doing. And if we look at knock your socks off service type things, usually it doesn't cost any money. It's just something that you go the extra little bit. You know, Mercedes had a thing for many years that you took your car in there for service, and they were, whatever your line item was on the RO, the service technicians were supposed to find one more thing that they would do for free. And usually it was a light bulb, something like that was burnt out somewhere in your car, some little thing, a filter here, some little thing that didn't cost a lot. They found it needed done, and they do it for free. And it's not free. You paid stupid money for the car. It's not free, but but people loved it. And many Mercedes still do that. I don't know if they do that here in town. I don't have a Benz. I need a car. I need it just testing service levels, right? That's all I need it for that. So if you're going to put a business together, we need to have the structure. What are the elements of the business that we need to have? What are the components? What are the function areas of a business that we need to have? There's 6 at least, maybe a couple more, but we'll talk about it.
Product or service?
Convenient for the customer?
Sales, marketing, accounting.
This is what I'm looking for, and you're on the right track there. So I need to have a finance department. No, I need to have a finance function. Doesn't have to be a department. And you said accounting. Is finance and accounting the same thing? No, it's not. It's both. They're both money. Finance, generally in business, finance is where the money's coming from. Your investment capital, your public company, is it shares that people buy? Is it a loan that you get? How much working capital do you need? Finance is about that. It's about the money required for you to operate. Accounting is about just keeping track of what people pay you for and what you have to pay vendors for, and other overheads. You know, normal operating expenses. Those fall under accounting. Would be maybe more in your mind a bookkeeping function, and I don't mean that in a menial way. Bookkeeping is meticulously keeping the records of all the pennies that you get and spend, right? Finance is a bigger picture of saying, we're going to need $1.5 million to go into that market. You know, where's that going to come from? You know, and it's big picture, big amounts of money in big sums that help us do the stuff that we need to do. And yeah, some of that is working capital, which goes to the bookkeeping side of things, it pays the bills and stuff like that. There's chunks of money that we get in to do that, that's provided by an investor, an investment group, you know, a merger of some sort, but that's finance. So those are two, finance and accounting. We need to have both of those functions covered. Do we have to do them ourselves? Shake your head this way. No, you don't. You can outsource everything in a company. You can, and they call that a hollow corporate structure. That's where you get all the functions done, but you pay other people to do it when you need it done. You know, why pay your own person to be there 24/7 if you don't need it 24/7? Outsource it. Have somebody else that already knows what they're doing and can do it on an occasional basis or maybe even full time. But we can outsource things if we want to. So those are two. Somebody said sales and marketing. You said sales and marketing. What's the difference between sales and marketing?
Marketing, getting them to buy it, sales will be taking the order after they see what it is they want to buy.
That's a pretty good definition. That really is a pretty good definition. Most colleges and universities have marketing degrees that you can get. Very few have a sales degree that you can get. And the money's in the sales side. Just saying. I don't know why that is. Sales is kind of looked down on. I mean, you know, the plaid coated used car salesman. Salesmen make our world go around. And they have the opportunity of making bank and having nice lifestyles. Don't diss this function of sales. Respect it, honor it, because someday you're going to pay a salesperson an awful lot of money if you are building your business. And you won't like that, but that is required. If without sales, you don't have a business, remember? That sales is where your purchase orders come from. So without sales, you don't have a business. Marketing is reaching groups of people. Sales is reaching one person. Kind of the way I would define it. You know, if we're marketing to millennials, how do we reach the millennials in this town? You don't buy an ad on the Hawk. That ain't gonna get, you know, and so they don't have radios, first of all, you know, it's not gonna work at all. So we target the market that we're looking for, and then we go sell to them one by one. A sale is a transaction one by one. Marketing is things that we do in broad strokes. And I want us to talk about marketing before we are done today. We'll look at that a little bit. Somebody had said operations on this side of the room. Might have been you, Eli. Somebody over here said operations. Might have been you, man. I heard operations anyway. And that's the stuff we do. That's building what we build, making what we make, providing the service that we provide. Whether it's intellectual, you know, maybe we are a networking company. You know, maybe I don't mean the kind where you go to parties. I mean the kind where you've got computers. You know, that's what I was thinking. So you may be offering an intangible service. You may be, you know, your product may be a haircut. You don't have those in inventory, do you? I want to buy a haircut. Well, I want to buy a haircut. Haircuts marketed differently, right? It's called marketing the invisible. I don't know, so I just don't get them. But I don't know if you're going to get a good haircut or bad haircut until you buy it. Same with a lawyer. You don't know if you get a good lawyer or a bad lawyer until you buy it. And just because they were good on the last case doesn't mean they're going to be good on your case, right? Because it's invisible what they're selling. And you have to take a chance. You're buying the invisible. So when we're buying the invisible, the game is a little bit different. If you're selling the invisible on the other end, you're trying to get people like me to buy the invisible. Selling the invisible is a different kind of marketing game than selling the tangible. And so if we're making a widget, you're selling a roller coaster at Knott's Berry Farm. You can draw it, we can model it, we can look at it, we can go kick the steel beams, we can look at the welds, we can inspect, we can define the paint. It's tangible. But when we are buying a service, an Uber ride, you don't know until you buy it whether it's the guy's nuts or not. You know, if it's in New York or LA or Vegas, you're on your own. there's a lot of really adventuresome rides to be had, and some good ones as well. But the fact is, we're buying the invisible, and so marketing is something that we have to learn to do. Most businesses that start are started by technicians. They're started by people that know how to do the business, but they don't know how to do the finance, and they don't know how to do the sales and marketing in most cases. So we call that the E-Myth. I didn't make that up. Michael Gerber wrote a series of books about that, and it would be worth reading. It's a three-legged stool about the shoemaker that opens a shoe shop, but he doesn't know how to run a business, and that's often the case. He knows how to fix shoes. That's what he knows how to do, and so it was naturally started a shoe shop because he knows how to do that. But that's not enough to sustain a business, right? We have to have, and it's okay that he doesn't know, as long as there's a she that knows how to do the books or somebody else involved. And I didn't mean that. I said that as a joke more than anything else. But it's often the owner's wife, isn't it, that becomes the expert on the part that the owner doesn't know anything about. And sometimes they do an awesome job, and sometimes it's not good enough. And the company struggles because you got somebody thrown in to a task that they weren't trained for. So you want an expert in the finance side, you want an expert in the sales and marketing side, and you need an expert in the technology side, the operations side. And those three legs are required for your business to be successful. If any one of those three doesn't three-legged stools tend to touch the floor, but you may be sitting real crooked. It's not going to be a good ride for you if you've got weakness in one of those areas. There's a couple more areas. There's two more that I would say that are functional areas of almost every business that you're going to start here locally. There needs to be some function of research and development, R&D. Now, if you're in molecular biology, your R&D has to do with what test assays you're coming up with. I know one company in town right now that's working on HIV-1 and HIV-2 tests for sub-Saharan Africa, for large populations that they want to test COVID and HIV at the same time. 20 million people have HIV there. And so they want to sort those out, and there's a company here in town working on that. That's a different R&D, right? That's an R&D with PhD scientists that understand biology, and rightfully so. Your R&D may be when Swig started out. I read this story. I don't know the people personally, but they were from here, at least part of the time. And the husband wasn't sure that you could have a business that was just a drink. It was like, really? Is that going to really be a business? All we got is a pop machine. That's the company, and is that going to work? So what he did is he sat outside of Mavericks for days and watched how many people went into Maverick and came out with only a drink. And after he'd done enough market research, he figured, looks to me like there's enough people going into Maverick that are just coming out with now he didn't see the cigarettes in their pocket. So on some of them, that's why they went to Maverick, but certainly not all. And they started Swig based on that. Is that R&D? That's R&D. It's not fancy R&D, but it's R&D. And so we have to have some sort of R&D activities that are going on for us to look out the window and see what's coming. Otherwise, the guys that were making roller skates would have never gone to inline skates and then to skateboards. Because roller skates right now are gone, right? If I was a roller skate manufacturer, I would be hurting if I didn't have an R&D department that said, hey, let's take those four wheels and put them in line. That'll work for a while, and then we'll make a board. And that's what they did, right? And the ones that did that stayed in business. The ones that didn't do that are gone. Because they didn't have an R&D team that was looking at what's next. And for that one, you had to have an R&D team also sourcing the factory in China that you're going to buy the parts from. Unfortunately, that's a flat world. It's a global world that we're in right now. There's one more that I think is a functional area that you can't get by without. Somebody's got to keep your software current, functioning, and talking to each other. You need an IT team. And that IT team is going to be doing things like, and some software, if you're not familiar with software costs, as we look at business, as we talk about management, become aware of what stuff costs. Where you work on your night job, the power bill, the electric power bill from Dixie Power is, last I heard, about $180,000 a month for electricity.
Twice.
It's twice that?
336,000.
336? Okay, they're a better customer than I thought. $336,000 a month for power. We've got to start hearing these numbers and learning these numbers. What does your workers' comp insurance cost? You know the number, and I bet you're the only one in the room that has any idea of how staggering that number is. Workers' compensation insurance, and if you're in an unsafe place, your costs are twice what your competitors are. Hard for you to compete because your E-mod's too high. Very hard for you to compete. And this is a real part of managing a business. I strayed from the IT side. Electricity and workers' comp isn't IT, but how about QuickBooks? How much does QuickBooks license cost right now? Do you know?
85
We
bucks a
don't
month.
use that. We use.
Oh, we don't use
specialized-
that. Okay, it's got so stupid we don't even use it.
No, we have a specialized because we have to do detailed job costing. So ours
Okay.
is probably, our program initially was about $30,000, and then we pay about $8,000 a year just for the maintenance, just for like maintaining the program and then customer support.
Yeah. Yeah. Y'all think that you've got Windows free on your computer at home, and you probably do, but Windows isn't free anywhere else. Enterprise Windows and the 360 is thousands of dollars, per person in your company that's using it. And software costs are just staggering. Everything we buy, every machine we got, it's got software, it's got updates to it that somebody has to keep track of, and somebody has to keep us on current and on board
And
with
that's
it.
only for 3 users. I mean, if you want more people to use that at a time, you pay more. Everything is an add-on.
It's unbelievable. The software costs to operate a business today. If you have a retail operation with point of sales, your POS software is super expensive per transaction, as well as the install fees and maintenance fees and all that kind of stuff. So get ourselves used to seeing some of these numbers as we think about penciling in our business. One of the first things that they're going to ask you to do over there, after you identify what kind of business structure you want to have, they're going to ask you to put together a pro forma. A pro forma is a make-believe guess at what's going to cost you to start your business, and what's going to be the upfront start cost, what are going to be the ongoing costs, and some idea of what your break-even points are at. That and a pro forma is looking all out the windshield. It's all guess. We don't know any of that stuff, but we need to guess close, or we're going to waste somebody's money. We're going to start a business that's going to fail because we don't have an idea of how expensive some of this stuff is. So that's one of the things that we want to do completely, is understand the various functions that we need. Now, those were 6 functions that I just named. There's one really that is supportive of all that, and that is the people side. So we can call that HR in a company if we want to. It's an owner's job to get the right people on with culture that matches what their dreams are. And it's our job, if we're part of that team, to help develop the talent that we need, so we're not hiring fresh people all the time that don't know what they're doing, that we're delivering the level of service that's necessary, that we don't have people in the back of the pool going, this kid's called for a grape popsicle 4 times now and doesn't want to put on his tux and go take him the grape pops. If that's our business model, we got to do that with a smile, right? That's the whole magic of what we are. Even though I'm sick of taking this whiny, loud kid his grape popsicle, but it's what the red phone is for, and they came here because of the red phone and that experience of what they heard. So, HR, if we want to call it that. All right, I want us to. We didn't really hardly get started on this. We've got 400 handouts that I am going to stack up, and I'm going to do a better job. I'm going to show us a marketing video that is going to be interesting anyway, and I'm going to give you a marketing handout that Larry, you're going to find interesting based on our conversation before class. This is 8 ways to use color, psychology, and marketing. So just an idea of some of the stuff that goes on in marketing. Take a copy of that. I printed that one in color so you can see the colors as we talk about marketing. Marketing is an interesting field, an interesting game, talking about it in this class because most people that are starting out business don't think of marketing and developing the marketing side of their organization. And if we're looking at talent development, an understanding of marketing is vital. This is a 9-minute video. And once upon a time, it's an 8-minute video, sorry. Once upon a time, I was in the advertising and ad agency business. The company I worked for, it wasn't me, but we bought an ad agency in Chicago. It was a legitimate agency. We were national in scope. We had a lot of good national accounts, some of which you would know. I'll tell a story or two about them. But Saatchi & Saatchi was one of our competitors, and this is a video clip that shows two of the design guys from Saatchi & Saatchi. It takes place in London, and another ad agency in London wanted to prove a point about the power of advertising. And so they did an experiment. They made up a company that they wanted to launch, and they said the company needs a logo, which if you're going to start a business, you're going to need an identity. You're going to need a brand. It's part of what marketing is. And so that logo development is often one of the things we do early on in a company. Well, when we do a pro forma, we figure out what our image is going to look like. And so they hired these two guys to develop a logo, and then they planted subliminal advertising. They picked them up at the airport in London at Heathrow and took them downtown London, and they tried to influence their brain without them knowing their brain was being influenced to see if they could predict what they would create. So they tried to impact the creative power. I think it's a great demonstration of the power of marketing in a kind of an unusual way. So I get a kick out of it, so we'll all take a look at this. Okay, we're almost done for the day. You've got a handout about color and marketing. What color is T-Mobile? Pinkish, purple, some special color that's theirs, right? What color was Kodak? Anybody remember camera company? What was it?
Yellow and black.
Yellow and black. What color is Hertz? Car rental.
Yellow and black.
Yellow and black also. What color is Avis?
Red.
What color is National?
Green.
What's up with that? We've got Chevron. What color are they? Versus Shell. What color is they? Yellow. So we've got brand colors in our brain, and that's not an accident. And when companies confuse us with their colors, that's a problem. McDonald's, what color are they? Yellow again. I mean, we don't have a lot of choices when it comes to colors, right? Crayola has 64 colors, and that's a lot because a bunch of them are the same, in my opinion. But anyway, the choices of colors matter from that handout. I'd ask you to read that handout a little bit and take a look and think about the colors of your business. Some companies mess up their colors. What color is Burger King? Uh-oh. What happened? Number 2 hamburger joint in the world. And they've got a Burger King Whopper color logo. And somebody somewhere along the line said you need to have a Mud Creek brown and a watered down green and a little bit of a rusty orange stripe on. Where did that come from? That's not even an appealing set of colors for a food place. Where did that come from? And as a result, they still haven't changed their logo color. The logo color on the sign is one, and of course there's a Burger King here in town that's had the sign down for 3 months. What's up with that? You can't do that. When signs go down, that's a moment of truth that you lose. If the light bulb goes out on your sign, it becomes forever the Texas Road Hoe, which is what the one was here for the first 3 weeks they were open. the USC was burnt out. It's like, how can you put that sign up and burn that in my head as the Texas Rodeo? That just ain't right, is what that is. So you've got to have your branding and your imaging polished up and together, or you send the wrong signals to your marketplace and you lose business that you didn't even deserve to lose. You know, you just gave it away because you didn't have the branding there. And there we saw the power. I've got another clip by the same guy, a similar ride from the taxi, another result where he just burned it into their minds in the taxi ride. And they came up with what he wanted them to come up with. It's like, wow.
It sucks that people are so easily manipulated.
We are. And we're going to buy, you know, the apple bottom jeans or whatever it is because, you know, they're $200 bucks,
They
but
all the time on Instagram.
yeah, we just wind up, that's what marketing is
Yeah,
about.
look on there in the morning.
All right, the last topic we're going to talk about, I want you to read that color thing for what it's worth. And if there's something interesting to your business that you could dig deeper in and find, a lot of research out there on colors. That's a pretty good reference piece on some of the meanings. If you're in the medical business, you don't probably want red, even though Johnson & Johnson has done well with it. In a physician's office, it's too close to blood on a lot of products. Blue is calm and soothing, and so it works better. You notice most medical supplies are like this light green and blue color. Well, that's a reason because we like that. Dentist office wants you calm down when you're sitting in the lobby. So, you know, the color schemes are designed to do that, whereas restaurants want you hungry. So put a color on the wall, it's going to make you hungry. If you didn't think there was one, read about it. It is there. I want to end up with what you learned so far in Pizza Hut versus Jimmy John's. I talked with a few of you, and I kind of know what you found or what you didn't found. Talk to me about it. What was easy and what was hard about this? And what was a surprise about it?
I sucked at finding the info because Pizza Hut was a conglomerate called Yum Inc. that also lumps in Taco Bell and other businesses. Yeah, and then Jimmy John's isn't publicly traded, so I had a hard time finding their information.
Yeah.
Then I thought I failed.
No, you didn't fail. This is what we typically will run into when we're doing market research. Difficult to get to the bottom of. If you're entering into a market where there's players like that, you're going to have to try to get sneaky about how you figure out what their numbers
You
are.
can pay money, and I wasn't going to do that.
You what?
You can pay money to join.
Oh
the-
yeah, you can pay money and buy the data. And no, I didn't want any of you to do that. I'm glad you didn't do that. I didn't want any of you to do that. But what you did find out was maybe interesting in a couple of ways. So if you looked at Yum in total, you saw that they were growing. 2015, they tanked. 2016, they tanked further. But they also happened to spin off Pepsi at that point in time. So if you happen to own Pepsi, that's a nice little piece of asset you got in your pocket. You can sell for a lot of billions of dollars, and they did, because their profit structure was sagging, and Pepsi was sellable. But Pepsi was also the profit piece, and so when you think about it for a second, we talked about Pizza Hut, and we see that Pizza Hut is stop and go in a bunch of markets. They rock in some places, and they don't in other places. Well, we see that if we start to peel apart their financials as best we can. You can get Yum financials where they do separate out some of their statements. However, you got to look at 200 pages to look at the 10Q and the 10K and figure that out. They also do a little bit of, let's say, posturing, or you could say ethically lying. When we talk about ethics questions and start looking at people's financials, there are some questions that will come to the surface. For example, what's wrong with KFC? And what is A&W doing in there? And you know, what's happening there? Is that brilliant, or is that a desperate grasping at straws? Don't know for sure. But I'm glad Yum owns them, because I think they got some problems in some of the markets that we've seen anyway, right? Locally here for sure. And that's a function of the brand as well as local owners. So they can make it worse, or they can make it better in some cases. But what we saw is that in general, their current numbers are up a little bit, aggregately as young, not impressively, but their numbers are climbing a little bit in gross numbers, but the profit numbers seem to be somewhat flat. Jimmy John's, the best you can do is what's called the FDD, which is the franchise disclosure document, where if I'm thinking about buying a Jimmy John's, they have to give me truthful financial picture of what the good and the bad is of what I can expect. Now, I can only take that and then multiply it times 6,000 locations or something and say, okay, that's probably what they're doing overall. And that's what the analysts do, is they look at what they're showing average store results, and then they're multiplying it up to try to take a good guess at what the corporation is doing overall. It becomes difficult to say when you have somebody like the founder of Jimmy John's died 2019, and we have a new corporation that's bought them. What is their game? You know, do they want to take this thing to the next level, or do they want to offload profits and spread them out? And you don't know. Like here in town, we've got Hash House A Go Go, which is the Hash House is gone in my opinion. I'm not sure what happened to them there, but they are owned by the same people that own Olive Garden and Red Lobster. So what happened there? Did they take profits from here to try to create a third brand that's going to make it? In which case, I think all they got to show for it's a bunch of John Deere farmhouse tractors. I don't know. I'm not dissing the brand. I'm from the Midwest. I know what that cooking tastes like, and that ain't it. And it's certainly not that expensive in the Midwest either for that. So I don't know. As we look at various business ventures, part of what we do in this class is dissect them like that, and we're hard on them. I don't mean bad of anybody that's invested their life savings and try to make a business go. It's real easy when you don't have money in it to sit back and go, what were they thinking? Come on, man. It can do better than that. But the lesson on the homework assignment is the data is there. And if they're a competitor of ours, we need to dig. And that's how you have to do it. You have to dig to find the data. Let's suppose we're in the car business. Digging to find, some of you were in a class that I just this spring looked at Tesla's first quarter financial results. And Tesla is an interesting company. Their biggest asset on the first quarter Q1 results was money in Bitcoin. And I'm not sure how the SEC didn't sanction Elon immediately. They did ultimately sanction for that because he had run up a cyber currency aside from Bitcoin while he's putting all the money in Bitcoin, and he's running up this other one which allowed him to buy Bitcoin for low. And that's pretty close to stock manipulation. And I think that he got a warning letter for that, but he reported it on Tesla's first quarter results. So Tesla was not as financially healthy when you peeled out the Bitcoin from the financial statement. So you have to look at it and see what's there and go, wait a minute, what are they doing here? And now we come back to the question, is that ethical? You know, is that ethical? And I have to say that I don't agree with what he did. I love Elon Musk for his disruptive nature and the things he's trying to do, and he's changing the world. I love that part about it, but we still have to keep a line of ethics, in my opinion. And when we bump against it, we need regulatory agencies, SEC, and other people to slap your hands and say, wait a minute, what you're doing is not quite right. I got a lot more to say, but it's 8:18. So I thank you for staying, and we will hope you have a good weekend. Still hot out there, be careful. And we'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks, Eric.
Hang on, Louise, take care.
Thank you. Get your bag.
Yeah, I hate purses. But I have to have my keys in something.
Well, you keep the keys to the car in them, then you'll never forget your purse.